Chapter 1512. Araki Takashi. The Taotai nodded gently to Suzumo and smiled. You came at the right time. That beast in the canyon is the leader of the rebellion this time round. If you can kill it, I'll record your merit. Suzumo arrived beside the Taotai and looked in the direction of the god-slaying canyon expressionlessly without moving. What's wrong? The Taotai glanced askance at him. If you still don't make a move, you won't have a chance to make any contributions when the two Protoss armies descend upon Tianhuang mainland and kill that beast. He won't die. Suddenly, Suzumo said. The Taotai frowned slightly. Suzumo pointed in the direction of the god-slaying canyon and continued, Do you know who he is? Araki Takashi, what are you trying to say? The Taotai narrowed his eyes with a cold glint. Suzumo said, He's not a beast. His name is Night Spirit and he's the brother of Araki Takashi. Suzumo turned around slowly and looked at the Taotai who was inches away, saying slowly, Sworn brother. The moment he said those words, the entire space seemed to have frozen. The atmosphere turned extremely strange. Suzumo and the Taotai faced each other and exchanged glances. All of a sudden, the Taotai opened his mouth and released a terrifying suction force that devoured Suzumo. Almost at the same time, a green light shone on Suzumo's glabella. The creation lotus platform burst forth and spun slowly, releasing a series of resplendent lights that smashed towards the Taoya's mouth fiercely. Although the Taotai had a huge appetite, he could not eat the creation lotus platform. If he crashed into the Taoya's head, it would be smashed into pieces. As a quasi-ancestor and the master of Kunlun, the Taotai had obtained countless treasures and resources in the Kunlun ruins, so his reaction was extremely swift and retreated at the first possible moment. However, he felt that there were two more palms on his arms. Even with his explosive power, he couldn't break free. The two of them were too close. At this distance, Suzumo had 1,000 ways to kill the Taotai. He didn't even have a chance to escape. Pucci. Under everyone's gaze, the Taoya's head was directly pierced through by the creation Qinglian. She crashed into the big mouth and created a huge bloody hole. This time, the Taoya's sea of consciousness was shattered. Suzumo grabbed the Taoya's arms with both hands, bent his knees, and rammed into the Taoya's chest like a galloping horse. Crack! The Taoya's chest caved in deeply and most of his bones were shattered. Shing! Blood spewed out. Suzumo tore off the Taoya's arms. Suzumo's outburst was filled with hatred and ruthlessness, venting all the killing intent in his heart in an instant. The Taoya's head was shattered, his chest caved in and his arms were torn off. His corpse fell heavily into a pool of blood in the distance and remained motionless. Even a Mahayana patriarch would definitely die after being beaten to such a state, let alone a quasi-ancestor. This scene caused an uproar. No one would have thought that the Kunlun army on Taoya's side had just launched an attack on the god-slaying canyon when their lord of Kunlun was killed by this new commander. The entire process was too fast. In the blink of an eye, the Taotai was dead. Before the 1,000 Kunlun army could react, Suzumo had already attacked once more. Sush! Suzumo's figure flashed and arrived before the 3 Protoss mighty figures in the blink of an eye. You have a death wish. The 3 Protoss mighty figures channeled their blood chi and burst forth with dazzling golden blood chi. The momentum was terrifying, and 3 bloodline phenomenons even rose behind the 3 of them. Amanai Pami? Play. Suzumo chanted Sanskrit and released the 6 words Daming mantra. At this distance, even the Protoss mighty figures couldn't be unaffected. The 3 Protoss mighty figures shuddered, and their blood chi was impeded. The condensation of their bloodline phenomenons also paused for an instant. At that moment, Suzumo formed hand seals. The 6 Daming dermic seals and the 6 words Daming mantra poured down and enveloped the 3 Protoss. Boom, boom, boom. Before the 3 Protoss mighty figures' bloodline phenomenons could fully condense, they were shattered by the 6 words Daming mantra and the Daming dermic seals and turned into nothingness. Suzumo slapped a Protoss's head with a backhand. His entire arm was like the trunk of a divine elephant, looking soft and powerless. Su Zimo's palm slapped the Protoss mighty figure's cheek. Kakaka. The Protoss mighty figure's head spun more than 10 times around his neck before it gradually stopped. His neck bones were all shattered. This Protoss's primordial spirit was also shattered by Su Zimo's palm. The other Protoss mighty figure was shocked. The storage ring on his finger flashed, and a two-handed greatsword appeared in his palm. The third Protoss mighty figure also swung his greatsword at the same time. The two Protoss mighty figures burst forth with blood chi. Golden light surged on the greatswords, dazzling and surging with divine power. Su Zimo did not dodge or evade. Instead, he strode forward and threw out two punches in reverse, striking the blades of the two gigantic swords. The two Protoss mighty figures were overjoyed. In their opinion, they would definitely cut off Araki Takashi's palm. The two Protoss mighty figures could already see blood in their eyes. Clang. It was different from what they had imagined. The two great swords slashed Su Zimo's fists, but not only did they not bleed, they didn't even leave a mark. However, the two Protoss mighty figures felt an extremely terrifying power enter their bodies through their great swords. Poof, poof. The two men's arms exploded into a cloud of blood mist. The web between their thumb and forefinger was torn, and their fingers were bleeding. Back in the exquisite realm, even the Protoss half-ancestor realm couldn't block Su Zimo's power. These two Protoss mighty figures couldn't even block a single punch from Su Zimo. The two Protoss mighty figures couldn't control their bodies at all and kept retreating. Something even more terrifying happened. The two Protoss mighty figures clearly saw that their great swords were full of cracks. They were actually shattered by Su Zimo's punch. The two Protoss mighty figures were shocked. Was this still a body of flesh and blood? Purple thunderstorm. Su Zimo formed a hand seal and pointed at the two Protoss mighty figures. A storm flickering with purple lightning quickly condensed and enveloped the two Protoss mighty figures. With Su Zimo's current primordial spirit cultivation, the power of this Dharma spell was already incomparably powerful. But now, the purple thunderstorm completely shattered the two Protoss mighty figures' great swords. The storm also contained many fragments of the great swords, constantly tearing apart the two Protoss mighty figures' bodies. Poof, poof, poof. Golden blood constantly splattered out from the storm. In just a few breaths' time, the storm dissipated. The two Protoss mighty figures' corpses fell from mid-air and landed heavily on the ground. Their bodies were already riddled with holes. The two Protoss mighty figures' consciousness had been pierced by several fragments of the great swords, and their divine souls were destroyed. The vicinity of the god-slaying canyon instantly fell into a dead silence. From the moment Su Zimo attacked to the end, less than 10 breaths' time had passed. The Lord of Kunlun's head was shattered, and he died on the spot. The three Protoss mighty figures were destroyed, and their souls were destroyed. This was Araki Takashi's wrath. End of chapter. Chapter 1513. The entire place fell silent. Even Extreme Fire and Nian Chi did not have the time to attack before the Taotai and the three Protoss died, let alone the Kunlun race members present. Half-Martial Ancestor Cold Spring and the others at the entrance of the canyon were even more surprised and delighted. With the death of the Lord of Kunlun, the Kunlun army on the other side was leaderless. Even though they had the numbers advantage, they might not be able to last long. The entire situation reversed rapidly after Araki Takashi appeared. Master, Nian Chi, stay here and guard the entrance of the canyon. I'll go help Night Spirit. Su Zimo said in a deep voice. More and more Protoss walked out of the Rainbow Cave and their combat strength increased as well. Night Spirit was already covered in injuries at this point of the battle. Even though he had a taboo body, he could not withstand the continuous attacks of so many Protoss. Night Spirit was fighting against an unimaginably massive civilization single-handedly. Su Zimo's figure flashed as he sped towards the god-slaying canyon. Outsider, how dare you? Although the Taotai was dead, he still had 9 commanders under him. All of them were loyal to him and were half-martial ancestor experts. Among them, 2 commanders leaped up and their massive bodies covered the skies as they charged towards Su Zimo. The two commanders were pure-blooded ferocious beasts with boundless blood chi and sharp claws. They released two innate divine powers. Instantly, the mountains collapsed and the earth cracked. Kill, kill, kill. Take revenge for the Lord of Kunlun. The Kunlun race under the two commanders also let out a roar of anger. Thousands of Kunlun race members charged over with dust billowing and flags fluttering. The ground shook and the mountains shook in a terrifying manner. Su Zimo's figure was incomparably tiny compared to the massive Kunlun army. It was as though he would be crushed the next moment without a corpse remaining. Su Zimo's expression was cold and two flames danced in his eyes as he said slowly, "You guys think you can stop me?" Before he finished his sentence, Su Zimo conjured hand seals continuously. Instantly, 3 balls of flames of different colors appeared around him. Golden Buddhist Dao Fire, Scarlet Immortal Dao Fire, Black Fiend Dao Fire. Under the guidance of Su Zimo's dermic arts, the 3 Dao Fires converged rapidly. After absorbing and refining the fretless wood, Su Zimo's cultivation realm was already at late-stage conjoint body and his dermic powers were vast. A single ball of Dao Fire was enough to kill conjoint body too. The lethality of the 3 balls Dao Fire was even more. The hearts of the 2 Kunlun race commanders stiffened as they sensed the impending danger. However, as half-martial ancestor experts, the 2 commanders wanted to fight against Su Zimo's Samadhi Dao Fire head-on with their innate divine powers. Su Zimo sneered and threw out the Samadhi Dao Fire in his hands. At the same time, a fiery light burst forth from his glabella and entered the Samadhi Dao Fire. It was an essence spirit fire. If it was only the descent of the Samadhi Dao Fire, the 2 Kunlun race leaders could still barely defend against it with their innate divine powers. However, after fusing with the essence spirit fire, the dermic art transformed completely and its might increased exponentially. The innate divine powers of the 2 Kunlun race leaders were instantly reduced to nothingness by the Kacharati Dao Fire. The 2 Kunlun race leaders did not even have the chance to escape. In the blink of an eye, they were devoured by the Kacharati Dao Fire and burned to ashes. Disperse! Su Zimo opened his mouth and blew in the direction of the Kacharati Dao Fire. That breath contained the purest and most condensed dermic powers. Swoosh! The Kacharati Dao Fire dispersed instantly, forming a firestorm that surged into the skies and swept forward. The moment the 2 Kunlun armies charged forward, countless Kunlun race members were engulfed by the firestorm and let out tragic cries. Once the Kacharati Dao Fire dispersed, its might would definitely decrease. However, it was more than enough to deal with 2 Kunlun armies. The Kunlun race below the conjoint body realm could not defend against that power at all. Even if some mighty figures of the Kunlun race could survive against the weakened Kacharati Dao Fire, they would be burned beyond recognition. The 2 Kunlun armies suffered heavy casualties and were in chaos. A portion of them were burned to death by the Kacharati Dao Fire. A portion of them were accidentally trampled to death by other demon beasts in the chaos. Within the blazing flames, countless Kunlun race members struggled and roared as they fled. It was as though they were in a Vichy hell. A green-robed, black-haired cultivator stepped on the flames with a cold expression. He was like a cold Hades who ruled over hell and judged life and death. The Kacharati Dao Fire burned the entire way and created a flaming passageway leading to the god-slaying canyon among the tens of millions of Kunlun army. On both sides of the flaming passageway, countless Kunlun race members retreated. Many Kunlun race members looked at the figure stepping on the flames with indescribable fear in their eyes. Under the illumination of the flames, their faces were incomparably pale. In the blink of an eye, Su Zimo arrived at the god-slaying canyon. The night spirit lay in the middle of the canyon. Up till this point of the battle, there were hundreds of wounds of various sizes on his body. No matter how strong his bloodline was or how shocking his regeneration capabilities were, his injuries would not improve without a chance to rest and recuperate. Beast! A Protoss half-martial ancestor stood in midair and gripped a golden sword with both hands, saying in a deep voice, "Give up! The 2 armies of light and darkness of God mainland are about to enter Tianhuang mainland." That's the main force of our Protoss this time round. You won't be able to defend against them. Shoo. A green beam of light tore through the air and collided with the Protoss half-martial ancestor. The Protoss half-martial ancestor held the golden sword with both hands and swung it in a circle, slashing forward. Clang. There was a loud bang. The Protoss half-martial ancestor shuddered. The golden sword flew out of his hand. In his vision he saw a jade-like, crystal-clear lotus platform with 7 circles of petals blooming in layers. It looked weak, but it emanated an extremely powerful aura. The creation lotus platform. What a treasure! The Protoss half-martial ancestor was not angry after losing the sword in his hand. Instead, he was delighted. When he saw the creation Qinglian in front of him, his bloodline avatar rose and suppressed toward the creation Qinglian. This Protoss half-martial ancestor actually wanted to take the creation Qinglian for himself. You don't know what's good for you. Su Zimo walked over slowly with a cold glint in his eyes. He activated his divine sense, and the creation Qinglian spun continuously, emitting dazzling green beams of light that illuminated the half-martial ancestor's pyramid avatar until it was riddled with holes. Su Zimo's cultivation wasn't the only thing that increased after absorbing and refining the worryless wood. Be it Qinglian's true body or the creation lotus platform, both had extremely obvious transformations. The Protoss half-martial ancestor was alarmed when his bloodline avatar shattered. It was only at this moment that he truly realized the danger and wanted to retreat. However, Su Zimo wouldn't give him the chance to do so. With a move of his divine sense, the creation Qinglian transformed into a green beam of light and smashed the Protoss half-martial ancestor's head into pieces. His divine spirit was destroyed, and he died on the spot. Kill! The Protoss shouted and turned around at the same time, charging towards Su Zimo. The death of a Protoss half-martial ancestor didn't deter the other Protoss from advancing. After all, there were only 2 people in the canyon. Meanwhile, the Protoss's 2 armies were about to arrive. Su Zimo and Night Spirit looked at each other. There was no fear in their eyes. Instead, they were filled with endless excitement and hot-bloodedness. If the 2 of them joined forces and fought side by side, what was there to fear even if there were thousands of soldiers and horses? Chapter 1514. More than 100 Protoss charged forward and summoned their bloodline phenomenons one after another. Ancient pyramids appeared in midair one after another, emanating a terrifying might that was extremely shocking. Billions of living beings prostrated beneath the hundreds of pyramids with pious expressions and prayed continuously. The Protoss spread their arms and stood on the pyramids like true gods. Their bodies shone with a blazing golden light that could not be looked at directly. Eastern barbarians, why aren't you submitting? A Protoss pointed at the billions of living beings prostrating beneath the pyramids and hollered, as long as you submit to the Protoss, you will be protected by the Protoss like these living beings. If you resist, your corpses will be suppressed in the pyramids for all eternity, unable to enter the cycle of reincarnation and receive the judgment of the gods. A look of realization flashed through Su Zimo's eyes. The billions of living beings that submitted to the Protoss pyramids should be phantoms left behind when the mainland of gods conquered other continents and worlds. In the primordial era, if there were no gods blocking the Protoss outside, there was a high chance that the billions of living beings on Tianhuang mainland would have had the same fate as those living beings. They would have been enslaved by the Protoss for all eternity. The living beings that prostrated around the pyramids had pious expressions. In their bones, they had already forgotten to resist. The mark of being enslaved had already seeped into their souls and bloodlines. At that thought, Su Zimo's eyes turned even colder. You're nothing but fake gods who bully the weak. Su Zimo said slowly, even if you're true gods, I'll drag you down from your pedestals and trample you into pieces for daring to step foot on Tianhuang mainland. The moment he said that, the hand seals in Su Zimo's hands changed continuously. One spell after another was released without any hesitation. It was like moving clouds and flowing water, dazzling the eyes of the onlookers. Sea Burial Secret Skill. Apocalyptic Fiend Fist. Mighty heavenly dragon expiation. Sandstorm. Great Sanskrit light fist. Avicii hell. More than 30 arts and secret arts were summoned in Su Zimo's hands within the blink of an eye. They surged forward like a destructive tide. Given Su Zimo's current cultivation, a single dermic art was enough to kill a mighty figure of the god race. And now, this scene was equivalent to over 30 Su Zimo attacking at the same time, bursting with spells at the same time. This kind of impact was even more terrifying than the 100 bloodline anomalies of the Protoss. Boom, boom, boom. The torrent formed by more than 30 dermic arts and secret skills collided with the 100 bloodline phenomenons, resulting in a deafening explosion. Kakaka. Cracks appeared on the ancient and majestic pyramids floating in the air, and they shattered one after another. The bloodline phenomenons of the mighty figures of the god race could no longer defend against Su Zimo's dermic art torrent. The expressions of the Protoss turned gloomy as they retreated while coughing up blood. Their eyes were filled with shock. The strength of Night Spirit was within their expectations. However, these Protoss did not expect this weak human before them to be able to control such terrifying power. Their bloodline anomalies could not withstand it. Is this the cultivation civilization of Tianhuang mainland? Some of the Protoss were shocked, and the way they looked at Su Zimo gradually changed. Blood flashed. A Protoss's head was crushed by a sharp claw on the spot. His spirit was destroyed, and his headless corpse fell from midair. Before the Protoss could react, a blurry figure flashed. Immediately after, a short scream sounded. Another Protoss was dead. Night Spirit had made his move. Just as Su Zimo's torrent of spells clashed with the Protoss bloodline anomalies and ended, Night Spirit had already snuck into the crowd of Protoss. The terror of Night Spirit was only fully revealed at this moment. Before this, Night Spirit was alone in the middle of the canyon. He could only fight head-on against the many Protoss and could not unleash the advantage of the god race. But now, Su Zimo was fighting against the many Protoss, creating the perfect killing environment for Night Spirit. Blood flashed continuously. Night Spirit walked among the Protoss like a god of slaughter in the darkness. These Protoss with shattered bloodline anomalies could not withstand Night Spirit's attacks at all. In just a dozen breaths, just now, more than half of the 100 Protoss were dead. Su Zimo also moved. His essence spirit had fused the essence of the three profundities of the immortal, Buddhist, and fiend sections. With a move of his spirit consciousness, he had truly reached the legendary boundless dermic powers. Even though he had just released the Kacharati Dao fire and more than 30 dermic arts, the power of his essence spirit was still extremely strong under the nourishment of the creation lotus platform. Su Zimo closed his sword fingers and slashed forward gently. Dozens of heaven-slaying sword chi burst forth and enveloped the Protoss opposite him. The heaven-slaying sword chi was too sharp. Not to mention that these Protoss did not have bloodline anomalies to protect them. Even if they did, they would not be able to withstand it. Protoss corpses fell from midair one after another. Under the joint efforts of Su Zimo and Night Spirit, the Protoss in the canyon gradually began to retreat. It was not that they wanted to retreat, but that they had no choice. Su Zimo attacked continuously while Night Spirit wandered in the dark, his tracks erratic. The many Protoss mighty figures could not split themselves and could not take care of both sides. If the Protoss were to let their guard down even a little, they would be met with fatal danger. Roar! Right then, a furious roar sounded from the back of the canyon. Amidst the roar, there were also cries of shock and misery. Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat as he turned back. Outside the canyon, a gigantic demon beast that was 1,000 feet tall stood tall. It was grayish-black in color and had a human face, a goat body and no eyes on its face. The demon beast's aura was terrifying and it had a horrifying bloody mouth that seemed like it could devour everything. Waving its sharp claws, it scattered the Kunlun beings who were tied by the purple gold ribbons. Even when extreme fire and Nian Qi joined forces, they could not suppress the ferocity of the demon beast and were forced to retreat continuously. The Taodai That demon beast was the Lord of Kunlun that had just died in Su Zimo's hands. But now, the Taotai had actually come back from the dead. How is that possible? Su Zimo frowned. Just now, he had already torn off the Taoya's arms and shattered its chest. It was understandable that the Taotai could recover from those injuries on his own. However, earlier on, the Taoya's head and consciousness were shattered by the creation lotus platform. Even if the Taoya's essence spirit was protected by an essence spirit dermic weapon, it could not have defended against it. How could the Taotai have come back from the dead? Araki Takashi. The Taotai reared his head and roared with endless hatred and rage. I'm going to tear you into pieces and grind your bones to dust. Pumph. Su Zimo's expression was cold as he said coldly, Tao, if I can kill you once, I can kill you a second time. Let's see how many more lives you have left. The Taotai had come back from the dead and led the Kunlun army to attack the entrance of the canyon. However, Extreme Fire, Nian Chi and the others could not defend against it. Su Zimo no longer bothered about the secret of the Taoya's revival and prepared to return to kill the Taotai once more. Right then, an extremely terrifying aura burst forth from the five-colored cave at the end of the canyon. The void above the canyon trembled. Chapter 15:15. From the cave shimmering with multicolored brilliance, a team of golden-armored divine race knights slowly walked out on warhorses. The warhorses beneath them were wrapped in golden armor, revealing only a pair of cold eyes. They were not ordinary warhorses. These warhorses had snow-white wings on both sides of their bodies and a sharp horn protruded from their heads as they flew slowly in midair. These Protoss knights wielded golden swords in their hands and stared at Su Zimo and Night Spirit with cold expressions. Haha. The Protoss laughed. Barbarians of Tianhuang mainland, you're finished. The light army of our continent of God has arrived on Tianhuang mainland. The darkness army is right behind us. The Protoss knights walked out slowly. Every single one of them shone with endless light that was dazzling. Most of these Protoss knights were at the conjoint body realm. Some of them were even half-martial ancestors. These Protoss half-martial ancestors were also riding Pegasus. However, they held spears with golden patterns in their hands and had terrifying auras. The most terrifying thing was that this was an army formed by Protoss mighty figures and Protoss half-martial ancestors. They were disciplined and filled with an iron-blooded killing intent. After entering the canyon, the Protoss knights were not surprised at all when they saw the corpses all over the ground. They were expressionless the entire time. In the blink of an eye, hundreds of Protoss knights entered the canyon. There were only slightly more than 1,000 people in the Light Army. Those who could enter the Light Army were all the strongest geniuses in the continent of God. Every knight in the Light Army was enough to sweep through their peers and dominate an area. With so many Protoss knights gathered together and formed an iron-blooded army, it was unimaginable what kind of lethality they could unleash. Furthermore, be it the armor or weapons on these Protoss knights, they were all created by the top swordsmiths of the continent of God. This army of light could even slaughter the tens of millions of Kunlun soldiers. Night Spirit had a grim expression. He knew that the test for them had just begun. The Protoss from before was nothing. The army of light in front of him represented the pinnacle of civilization on the godly continent. After this radiant army, there was another darkness army that had yet to appear. At that time, what would the situation be like when the two legions arrived together? At the entrance of the canyon, the Taotai came back from the dead and led the Kunlun army to close in. Between Su Zimo and Night Spirit, one of them had to deal with the Tao. Night Spirit, take care of the Tao. Su Zimo pondered for a moment and quickly made a decision. I'll stop the Protoss's Radiant Legion. Comparing the front and back of the canyon, the Protoss side was definitely the most dangerous. Behind them was only the power of the Kunlun ruins. On the other hand, the Protoss had the power of the entire godly continent. Su Zimo's choice was pushing himself to the edge of the cliff. Big brother, Night Spirit wanted to refuse, but just as he opened his mouth, he was interrupted by Su Zimo. Night Spirit. Su Zimo looked at Night Spirit and said in a deep voice, Only you are the most suitable to resolve the matter of the Kunlun ruins. Only you can suppress the Kunlun tribe. In terms of bloodline and origin, Night Spirit was the true master of Kunlun. There was an irreconcilable enmity and conflict between him and the Tao. The two of them had to decide the victor and life and death. Once the Tao died, with Night Spirit's prestige, it was very likely that he could suppress the remaining Kunlun tribe. However, Su Zimo was different. These Kunlun tribe did not acknowledge Su Zimo at all. Even if the Tao died, these Kunlun tribe would not listen to Su Zimo. If Su Zimo were to deal with the Kunlun army, he would only be able to start a massacre. It would not benefit the entire situation at all. Su Zimo said, "Night Spirit, you have to kill the Tao with thunderous methods and subdue the rest of the Kunlun tribe before you can rush back to help me." Got it? Night Spirit nodded. "Don't worry, before you return, I'll definitely guard the God-slaying canyon and not let a single Protoss go." Su Zimo's tone was firm. After pausing for a moment, Su Zimo reminded again, "Also, you have to be careful. This Tao has a bit of skill. I just smashed his head, but he didn't die and came back to life. I suspect that this Tao's essence spirit might not be residing in his sea of consciousness. Don't worry, big brother." After saying that, Night Spirit's figure flashed and he disappeared from the spot. When he reappeared, he was already at the entrance of the canyon. Right now, it was a race against time. The sooner he killed the Tao and took control of the entire Kunlun tribe, the sooner he could rush back to help Su Zimo. "Barbarian of the East, I'll give you a chance. If you submit to me now, I can take you in as a personal guard by my side." A half-martial ancestor Protoss wielded a spear and rode out slowly on a Pegasus, looking down at Su Zimo from above. At that moment, the entire light army had already entered the canyon and there were more than 1,000 of them. Among them, there were dozens of half-martial ancestor experts. The rest were conjoint body mighty figures. The half-martial ancestor Protoss said proudly, "I'll guide you personally and teach you the noble civilization of the Protoss so that you can break free from your identity as a barbarian." Fu. Su Zimo sneered, "That's all you Protoss are capable of. You can't even cross this canyon after entering Tianhuang mainland twice. How dare you spout nonsense in front of me?" The expressions of the many Protoss of the Light Army darkened. The primordial war was the eternal humiliation of the continent of gods. The continent of gods had conquered many worlds, occupied countless territories and enslaved billions of living beings. They had never suffered such a crushing defeat. The reason why they were making a comeback today was to wipe away the humiliation of the primordial era. "Barbarian of the East, you've successfully angered me." The half-martial ancestor Protoss raised the spear in his hand slowly. It shone with golden light as he pointed it at Su Zimo and said coldly, "Right now, I won't let you off even if you kneel before me. Today, I'll let you witness the strength of my light army." Before he finished his sentence, the spear in the hands of the Protoss half-martial ancestor shone with a golden light. At the same time, every single Protoss knight in the light army drew their swords in unison. A golden light burst forth from their swords. Thousands of golden lights condensed in midair. In the blink of an eye, they formed a golden spear that was hundreds of feet long. It lay horizontally in midair, emitting a heart-palpitating aura. Su Zimo narrowed his eyes slightly, and his heart trembled. This spear wasn't the power of one or two Protoss. Instead, it had fused the power of the entire light army with a secret technique. Being pointed at by this huge golden spear, even Su Zimo felt his scalp tingle. All of a sudden, alarm bells rang in Su Zimo's mind. There was no time to think. Lightning arcs emerged from Su Zimo's body, and a pair of magic power wings suddenly grew out from his back. Finally, his figure turned into a bolt of golden lightning and disappeared on the spot. Ethereal wings, lightning escape, and earth-traversing golden light. With the three great escape techniques fused, Su Zimo's speed reached the extreme. Chapter 15-16. Boom. The gigantic golden spear pierced through Su Zimo's afterimage and crashed heavily into the canyon not far away, producing a deafening bang. Countless rocks rolled down and the entire canyon shook as dust and sand billowed. Su Zimo's figure reappeared. A hint of seriousness flashed through his eyes. The attack from the Light Army this time could already threaten his life. Just now, if he could not dodge in time, even the rank 7 Qinglian's true body would not be able to escape unscathed and would definitely be severely injured. "And, let's see where else you can hide." The Protoss half-martial ancestor sneered and raised the spear in his hand once more. "Charge!" The Protoss half-martial ancestor gave the order. The Light Army that was originally silent and motionless suddenly moved. Thousands of Pegasus flapped their wings, causing the wind to howl as they galloped over on auspicious clouds. Wielding their great swords, the many god race knights charged toward Su Zimo with an incomparable aura, with an indomitable will. The Pegasus galloped and their iron hooves clanged, causing the entire void to tremble. Under such an impact, even if Night Spirit and Su Zimo joined forces, they would definitely not be able to withstand it, let alone Qinglian's true body. Su Zimo's expression was calm as he thought of countermeasures. The more this was the time, the calmer he had to be. If it was a normal battle, he could rely on his movement technique speed to deal with the Light Army and not take them head-on. However, the place he was standing at now was called the God-Slaying Canyon. Because of the primordial war, God? Huiwan's remonstrance? Cowardly delete, spit out the old, resist the Magpie Man drink? If he retreated, the Light Army would charge straight in and join forces with the Tao. Night Spirit, Extreme Fire, Nian Qi and the others would definitely be defeated. At that time, even if he had countless methods, he would not be able to hold on. He had to kill the Light Army in the God-Slaying Canyon. Su Zimo slapped his storage bag and a jade-green longbow appeared in his hand. Ancient unique treasure, Lawbreaker Bow. Su Zimo stood in the air. His eyes were like torches as he pulled open the spell-breaking bow. Dermic powers gathered wildly at his fingertips. In the blink of an eye, an arrow of dermic powers appeared on the bowstring. The bow was like a full moon, and the arrow was like a shooting star. The long arrow tore through the air and arrived in an instant, shooting towards the god race half-martial ancestor in the lead. The Protoss half-ancestor's eyes flashed with astonishment. But in the blink of an eye, this wisp of surprise vanished, and he became tranquil once more. In the blink of an eye, the Protoss half-ancestor actually raised the spear in his hand and lightly pushed it in front of him, colliding with the magic power arrow. Soon the magic power arrow brushed past the Protoss half-ancestor's spear, producing an ear-piercing sound and sending sparks flying everywhere. The reaction of this Protoss is too fast. He was also powerful enough. Back then, Su Zimo, who was still at the early stage conjoint body realm, could not escape unscathed from the magic power arrow of the Lawbreaker Bow and was injured in Qinglian's true body. In front of Enigma Palace, Su Zimo wielded the Lawbreaker Bow and shot down many mighty figures of Enigma Palace. Even half-ancestors could not withstand it. However, this Protoss half-ancestor was able to attack in time. Although he could not completely block the magic power arrow, he changed the direction of the magic power arrow with a push of his spear and it brushed past him. The Protoss half-ancestor neutralized the Lawbreaker Bow almost perfectly. Su Zimo's expression did not change. That was because although the arrow did not kill the Protoss half-ancestor, it was blocked by the Protoss half-ancestor and changed direction, instantly shooting into the crowd behind him. A sanguine light appeared. In the Light Army, a Protoss knight's glabella was pierced by the magic power arrow. His head exploded instantly and he fell from his Pegasus, dying on the spot. Although the Protoss half-ancestor could react, the Protoss mighty figures behind him were completely caught off guard. However, the loss of a Protoss knight was insignificant to the entire Light Army. The other Protoss knights had cold and expressionless expressions from beginning to end. The speed of the Light Army's charge did not decrease at all. "Raise your shields." The expression of the leading Pro's half-ancestor did not change as he raised his spear and shouted. Before he could finish his sentence, apart from the spear-wielding half-martial ancestors of the god race, the rest of the god race mighty figures behind him had a thick and heavy shield flickering with golden light in their left hands. These Protoss knights held swords in their right hands and shields in their left hands. They rode on their Pegasus with cold expressions and continued charging. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Su Zimo pulled the lawbreaker bow continuously. Magic power arrows pierced through the air one after another. This time, Su Zimo did not target the half-ancestor Protoss with spears. Instead, he targeted the Protoss knights with swords and shields. Clang, clang, clang. A series of sounds of metal clashing rang out, rising and falling one after another. In the light army, the Protoss knights were shot down by the lawbreaker bow one after another, but no more blood appeared. Not long after, these Protoss knights jumped up again and returned to their Pegasus to continue charging. The coldness in their eyes was even more intense. Su Zimo frowned slightly. These Protoss knights were all wearing heavy armor and had golden shields in front of them. They almost did not expose any weaknesses. Although his lawbreaker bow was powerful and fast and could hit these Protoss knights, it was very difficult for it to penetrate the armor on these Protoss knights. Even if some of the Protoss knights were injured, it would not hurt their vital parts. With the self-healing ability of the Protoss bloodline, they would be able to recover their combat strength very quickly and rejoin the charging army. After shooting more than 10 arrows in a row, not only did they fail to stop the charge of the light army, the distance between the two sides was constantly closing. Haha. The Protoss half-ancestor laughed loudly and mocked. Barbarian of Tianhuang Wasteland, you want to stop my light army's conquest with just a broken bow. You're really ignorant and fearless. Su Zimo's expression was calm. He was not discouraged. He pulled the lawbreaker bow again and shot more than 10 arrows. With the help of the Lotus Throne of Creation, as long as his primordial spirit was strong and his magic power was abundant, he could continuously shoot magic power arrows. This time, Su Zimo did not aim at the Protoss knights. Instead, he shot at the Pegasus beneath these Protoss knights. These celestial horses were also covered in armor, but their eyes were exposed. If the magic power arrows could pierce the eyes of these Pegasus, the power in the arrows would be enough to destroy the primordial spirits of these Pegasus. With the death of the Pegasus, the light army would definitely be in chaos, and their charging momentum would naturally stop. As expected, a Pegasus could not dodge in time and was pierced by the magic power arrow through its eye. In an instant, its head was pierced through, and its primordial spirit was destroyed. With a loud bang, its huge body collapsed. This caused quite a bit of chaos in the Radiant Light Army. The speed of their charge also decreased slightly. Change formation, spear-shield formation. The Protoss half-ancestor raised his spear and shouted softly. When the Protoss knights heard the order, they lay on the Pegasus and stuck close to its back, protecting it with the giant golden shield in front of it. In this way, the giant golden shield completely protected the Pegasus and the Protoss knights behind it without any flaws. As for the other Protoss half-ancestors, they raised the spears in their hands and led the Protoss knights behind them to charge again. The Protoss half-ancestor raised his spear, and the Protoss knights raised their shields. Under the sunlight, the entire light army bloomed with a dazzling brilliance. Like an indestructible all, they charged fiercely toward the god-butchering canyon. Chapter 15-17. Su Zimo's expression was cold. Every single one of those Protoss experts possessed extremely frightening combat strength. Coupled with their almost indestructible armor, they were almost invincible against those of the same cultivation realm. In a one-on-one fight, Extreme Fire and Neon Chi might not be a match for those Protoss knights. As for the thousands of God Race knights, they formed an army and charged forward. Even Su Zimo found it troublesome to deal with such an aura, explosion, and power. Initially, Su Zimo wanted to use the heaven-slaying sword Chi. However, the armor on those Protoss knights was made of some unknown material. It was as tough as metal and even Dermic Resolve bows could not penetrate it. There were ancient unique treasures, divine phoenix bones, Soraka flowers and creation Qinglian in Tianhuang mainland. It was only normal for all sorts of natural treasures to be born on God's mainland. Although the killing power of the heaven-slaying sword Chi was terrifying, There was a limit to the damage it could cause. Standing in midair, Su Zimo looked at the approaching light army motionlessly, as though he was lost and helpless. "And I, the Protoss, am the god of all races. Everywhere the light army passes, everything has to submit. Tunhuang mainland is no exception." The Protoss half-martial ancestor pointed with his spear arrogantly. "Fu!" Suddenly, Su Zimo laughed and shook his head. "In the primordial era, you guys suffered heavy casualties and returned in defeat. Today you guys still can't make it?" When he saw that the light army was already deep into the canyon, Su Zimo slapped his storage bag and took out a dark gray mountain peak, tossing it forward. It was the ancient unique treasure, Mystic Magnet Mountain. Under the control of Su Zimo's spirit consciousness, the Mystic Magnet Mountain rose to a height of 10,000 feet in the blink of an eye. A huge shadow shrouded over, covering the skies and suppressing the back of the light army with a rumbling might. Boom! The Mystic Magnet Mountain descended and blocked the middle of the god-slaying canyon without leaving a single gap. Fufu. This ant actually managed to throw out a mountain and miss it. The Mystic Magnet Mountain descended, but it didn't hit a single Protoss. The Protoss sneered. The Protoss commander frowned and muttered, "Something's not right." This mountain did not seem to be suppressing the Radiant Army, but blocking their escape route. Suddenly, all of a sudden, many of the Divine Race members felt an extremely powerful suction force coming from behind them, constantly pulling their figures and flying towards the back. The entire army of light, thousands of Protoss knights, including the Protoss half-ancestor, and even the Pegasus they were riding, were not spared. The powerful momentum of the Radiant Army was instantly disintegrated. These Protoss knights wore heavy armor and held swords and shields in their hands. Even the Pegasus they rode on was tightly wrapped in armor. The mystic magnet power was unleashed to the extreme by these Protoss knights. Nearly half of the Protoss knights in the Army of Light had charged too fiercely and suddenly stopped, causing them to tumble and fall from midair. The Pegasus let out a painful neigh and flew toward the Mystic Magnet Mountain uncontrollably. Many Protoss knights could not withstand the Mystic Magnet power either. Boom! Some Protoss knights stabbed their swords and shields heavily into the ground, wanting to use them to block the Mystic Magnet Mountain's power. However, the swords and shields carved out huge trenches on the ground and could not stop them from approaching the Mystic Magnet Mountain. Everything in the world had a counter to each other. The armor on these Protoss knights and the swords and shields in their hands were indestructible. However, they were precisely countered by the Mystic Magnet Mountain. The swords and shields used by the Protoss knights were as heavy as tens of thousands of kilograms. Only the Protoss bloodline and physical bodies could easily control them. However, the heavier these weapons were, the greater the mystic magnet power they had to withstand. Some Protoss half-martial ancestors were shocked and furious. They circulated their chi and blood and erupted with powerful strength to resist the Mystic Magnet Mountain's power. They remained unmoved. However, the Pegasus beneath them let out sorrowful cries one after another. However, these Pegasus could not withstand the pull of these two forces at all. Their bodies exploded, and layers of blood seeped out of the gaps in their armor as they knelt on the ground. If it was just the Mystic Magnet Mountain, it would not be able to threaten these Protoss. After all, the Mystic Magnet Mountain could only release the Mystic Magnet power and could not hurt people. However, at this moment, Su Zimo, who was not far away, pulled the Spellbreaker bow again. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. Magic power arrows turned into streams of light and shot toward the Army of Light, arriving in an instant. Streaks of bloody light burst forth from the Army of Light. Some Protoss knights were wearing heavy armor and were already struggling to resist the Mystic Magnet power. How could they have any strength left to resist the Spellbreaker bow? Magic power arrows shot through their faces and directly pierced through their sea of consciousness. The essence spirits of many Protoss knights were killed on the spot and collapsed weakly. After losing their strength, these Protoss corpses were sucked over by the Mystic Magnet Mountain and stuck to it heavily, emitting a series of loud clangs. Swoosh, swoosh. Su Zimo's Spellbreaker bow showed no signs of stopping. Magic power arrows tore through the air one after another. It was not only the Protoss knights that died, but also the Protoss half-martial ancestors. Under normal circumstances, given the reaction and strength of the Protoss half-martial ancestors, they should be able to neutralize the Spellbreaker bow. However, under the Mystic Magnet Mountain's envelopment, these Protoss half-martial ancestors had to resist the Mystic Magnet Mountain, and their movement speed was reduced to the limit. Some Protoss half-martial ancestors saw the magic power arrows shooting over, but they could not dodge and were killed on the spot. With the Mystic Magnet Mountain around, these Protoss knights were practically living targets. In dozens of breaths, Su Zimo shot out hundreds of magic power arrows. Meanwhile, hundreds of Protoss had already died in the light army. None of the arrows missed. The leading Protoss half-martial ancestor was furious. One had to know that these Protoss mighty figures that formed the light army were the most outstanding geniuses on the continent of gods. Each of them had a high chance of stepping into the Mahayana realm. But now, in just dozens of breaths, hundreds of them had died in the light army. The number of deaths was still rising rapidly. What made him even angrier was that he could not stop Su Zimo's killing at all. Retreat! Retreat! The Protoss half-martial ancestor shouted loudly and summoned his bloodline phenomenon to block an arrow shot at him with all his might. His entire body trembled, and a trace of blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. The entire light army began to retreat. However, their path of retreat had been completely cut off by the Mystic Magnet Mountain. When the light army charged over, they were aggressive, but in the blink of an eye, they retreated in defeat, leaving behind a ground full of corpses and heavy casualties. Just by retreating to the foot of the Mystic Magnet Mountain, more than 300 Protoss knights had already died. Many Protoss knights wanted to cross the Mystic Magnet Mountain, but they were under a powerful suction force at the foot of the Mystic Magnet Mountain. Even if they wanted to leap into the air, it was as difficult as ascending to the heavens, let alone crossing over. Shatter this mountain for me. The Protoss half-martial ancestor was already somewhat flustered as he shouted. Clang, clang, clang. Many Protoss swung their swords and shields, clashing head-on with the Mystic Magnet Mountain. However, they were wearing heavy armor and were restrained by the Mystic Magnet Mountain. They could not unleash half of their strength and could not shake the Mystic Magnet Mountain at all. Su Zimo kept shooting arrows with a cold expression. He flew through the air like a grim reaper, making the Protoss feel suffocated. Chapter 1518. Outside the God-slaying canyon. Night Spirit led the old Kunlun subordinates and clashed with the Taoyes Kunlun army of tens of millions. Night Spirit did not tangle with the other Kunlun tribe members and charged straight for the Tao. Brat, do you really think I'm afraid of you? The Taotai roared and moved his divine consciousness. The 5 commanders under him rushed over and stood at different locations, forming an encirclement with the Taotai, trapping Night Spirit in the middle. Roar! Night Spirit looked at the 5 commanders and roared at them. It was earth-shattering and emitted a soul-stirring aura. This was an aura that belonged to a taboo. The 5 commanders' auras weakened and they did not dare to look Night Spirit in the eye. They knew very well that Night Spirit was the true master of Kunlun and they were the traitors. The Taotai sensed the fear in the eyes of the 5 commanders and could not help but sneer, "What are you afraid of? This brat has been fighting with the Protoss for so long, he's already exhausted. The wounds on his body are still bleeding. What combat strength can he still have? He's just an arrow at the end of its flight. If we join forces, we'll definitely be able to kill him. At that time, Kunlun ruins will be our world." The 5 commanders took a deep breath and gradually calmed down. The Taotai continued, "Don't expect this brat to let you go just because you surrender now. God? Yurenbao? Yuanbao Yen? Play? Laxity?" The Taoye's words truly confirmed the thoughts in the 5 commanders' hearts. The I was right. They had no way out. They could only fight. Kill. The 5 commanders shouted and pounced towards Night Spirit with murderous intent. Suddenly, Night Spirit moved like a ghost and disappeared on the spot. In the blink of an eye, he appeared in front of the Tao. The Taotai reacted quickly as well. He opened his mouth wide and bit down on Night Spirit's neck. The two behemoths fought each other. Streaks of blood-red light appeared and scattered in the void. Normally speaking, even if the Taotai was a quasi-ancestor, he would absolutely be unable to resist Night Spirit's attacks. However, the Night Spirit was now covered in wounds from the battle with the Protoss. His combat power had been greatly reduced. The two demon beasts were locked in a fierce battle, and it was difficult to tell who would emerge victorious. The 5 commanders turned around and charged forward. Night Spirit and Taotai were separated. Using God? Ami Nain? Plum tattoos? Mi Huan? Kuang Yin and Yanqi? Song Bin? Suddenly, a black shadow appeared and disappeared in an instant. One of the commanders had a gloomy expression. His life force was rapidly fading away. A bloody hole had appeared between his eyebrows, and scarlet blood flowed out. He was killed by the Night Spirit's tail. From the beginning to the end, the commander did not see any trace of the Night Spirit. The 6 demon beasts fought and blood flashed continuously. In fact, there were even severed limbs that danced in midair. It was an increasingly tragic sight. The melee combat between demon beasts was extremely dangerous. Even if they could kill the other party, they would inevitably be injured. After dozens of breaths, although Night Spirit relied on his ghostly movement technique to assassinate the 3 commanders one after another, there were 7 to 8 wounds on his body. One of the wounds was so deep that his bones could be seen and was dripping with blood that could not be stopped. That was left behind by the Tao. If Night Spirit had dodged slightly slower, the Taotai would have bitten Night Spirit's body into 2. The battle was still ongoing. One of Night Spirit's legs was bitten off by the Taotai. This injury was not fatal for conjoint body mighty figures. However, Night Spirit had expended too much dermic powers and his essence spirit was weak. In fact, he could not even regrow that severed leg in the midst of the battle. It was only after he was severely injured that Night Spirit managed to kill the remaining 2 commanders. The Taotai devoured Night Spirit's severed leg in large mouthfuls and was dripping with blood. Even if it was a severed leg. God? Song Tan, Yen Yun, which Tijun? Yushue? Tijun? Shua Lingfei # Night Spirit's blood had aroused his ferocious nature completely. He. The Taotai licked his scarlet lips and circled Night Spirit slowly. As he searched for Night Spirit's flaws, he said, "Brat, you can't hold on for much longer. It's enough to kill you." Even though he was severely injured and his body was broken, Night Spirit's voice did not waver at all. For Night Spirit, he could kill the Taotai completely as long as he seized an opportunity. Against a god? What was the burden? What was the use of dragging and prying? What was the use of trickery? God? What was the punishment of the Shengli lineage? The Shenghuai lineage? The Shengli lineage? Jiqiao? Song Bijie? A god at his peak? Shengli? Shenglong? If Night Spirit was at his peak, the Taotai might not last more than 3 breaths. The Taotai circled to the direction of Night Spirit's severed leg. He paused for a moment and suddenly pounced forward. The severed leg was Night Spirit's biggest flaw. The Taotai wanted to seize this flaw and kill Night Spirit completely. As expected, because one of his legs was severed, Night Spirit's turn was not as agile as before and became a little slower. The 2 demonic beasts collided fiercely. In the chaos, the Taotai bit Night Spirit's arm. The sharp teeth instantly pierced through the purplish gold scales on Night Spirit's body. That bite almost tore off Night Spirit's arm. A look of pain flashed through Night Spirit's eyes. However, he did not struggle or roar. Instead, he endured the pain and bit down viciously on the Taoyu's head. A strange look flashed through the Taoyu's eyes. He did not dodge and continued exerting strength, shaking his gigantic head to bite Night Spirit's arm. He was in no hurry. His stamina and injuries were much better than Night Spirit's. As long as he accumulated his advantage bit by bit and slowly wore down Night Spirit, he would be able to wear him down. This time round, he intended to tear off another arm of Night Spirit. As for his head, he did not care at all. That was because he would not die even if his head was crushed by Night Spirit. Almost all demonic beasts had their essence spirits in the consciousness of their brains. However, he was different. His essence spirit was not in his mind at all. However, it was in his eyes under his armpits. After the Taotai transformed into their true form, they had a human face and a goat body. There were no eyes on their faces at all. Their eyes were hidden under their armpits and were extremely hidden. That was their greatest weakness. After a Taotai cultivated an essence spirit, it would be hidden in the eyes under their armpits as well. That was the reason why Su Zimo was able to revive the Taotai even after severely injuring it and shattering its head. That was the key. Even if his head was shattered, his essence spirit would be fine and could grow another one. To the Taotai, the head was like 4 limbs. The reason why he was able to recover quickly after being severely injured by Su Zimo and was even able to fight against Night Spirit was because he possessed 2 essence spirits. He had once obtained a huge opportunity in Kunlun ruins and was able to cultivate 2 essence spirits that were hidden in his eyes under his armpits. In other words, his dermic powers were twice as strong as other Tao. He naturally had his trump card since he could intimidate Kunlun ruins and become the Lord of Kunlun. Chapter 1519. Against Night Spirit's attack, the Taotai did not dodge or dodge. He merely bit Night Spirit's arm with all his might. Snap! Night Spirit's arm was bitten off by the Taotai. Fresh blood splattered everywhere in a shocking manner. Young master! When the old Kunlun subordinates saw this scene, they roared with grief and indignation. Extreme Fire and Nian Qi were extremely anxious as well. However, they were already completely surrounded by the Kunlun army and could barely fend for themselves, let alone help Night Spirit. On the battlefield, Night Spirit was left with only 2 intact limbs. He was in an extremely miserable state. As for the Taotai, he bit down on Night Spirit's severed arm excitedly and gulped it down in large mouthfuls. All of a sudden, the Taotai felt an unprecedented sense of danger and was shocked. Widening his eyes, he finally realized something. Night Spirit did not bite towards his head at all. Instead, the moment he bit down, he changed his direction at the last minute and bit down on his shoulder. Although Night Spirit's body was weak, his teeth were even more terrifying than the Taotia's. That bite instantly severed the Taotia's entire arm. The essence spirit of the Taotai that was hidden under his armpit was also bitten down by Night Spirit. Before it could escape, it was crushed by Night Spirit and swallowed into his stomach. Ah! The Taotai shrieked tragically. He retreated, wanting to distance himself from Night Spirit and fight again. After all, he still had an essence spirit hidden in another armpit eye. Even if they fought again, he would have the absolute advantage. He had lost an essence spirit. However, his severed arm could be regrown with dermic powers in the blink of an eye. As for Night Spirit, he was so weak that he could not even regrow his severed arm. However, Night Spirit's massacre did not stop at all. When the Taotai wanted to retreat, he realized that he had nowhere to retreat to. Puchi! A black shadow flashed behind the Taotai and accurately pierced his other shoulder blade, piercing through his armpit. This was the Night Spirit's tail. The Taotia's second primordial spirit was also killed by the Night Spirit on the spot. How is this possible? A look of disbelief appeared on the Taotia's face. The life in his body was rapidly draining away. Even in death, he did not understand how he had been defeated so quickly. The secret of the Taotai clan, other than those people from the primordial age, no one knows about it. How did you? The 2 primordial spirits of the Taotai were destroyed. It was only because his life force was still exuberant, and he hadn't immediately died. A wisp of remnant soul, a wisp of will, lingered around his body for a long time without dissipating. You're right, the Night Spirit said indifferently. Your secret is indeed only known to those people from the immemorial era. I know because before my parents died, they told me all these secrets through the method of passing on their memories. The Taotai gradually understood. When they left behind the Kunlun barrier, they were worried that today's situation would happen. Therefore, they told me all the weaknesses of the 4 commanders under them, including your Taotai clan. The Taotai laughed bitterly. There were 2 gods in his lineage? Sheng Shen Shao? Shishi? Ostrich by Guang? Liao Yushi? Who would have thought that in the end, he would still lose to the two gods of the primordial age? The Taoye's huge corpse fell from midair. With a bang, it fell into a pool of blood, causing countless blood flowers to splatter. Whether it was the Kunlun army led by the Taotai or the old subordinates of Kunlun, every single member of the Kunlun race witnessed this shocking scene. The former master of Kunlun had fallen. It was as if it was a sign that the new master of Kunlun was born. In midair, the night spirit only had one arm and one leg left. He could barely maintain his balance by relying on his tail. However, the night spirit stood in the air with endless majesty. His expression was cold as he looked down on all living beings. He roared in the direction of the Kunlun army. Roar! Pressure surged. The hearts of the Kunlun people trembled. Extreme Fire and Nian Qi were overjoyed. At this point in the battle, they finally saw a turning point in this battle. Listen up, Kunlun people. That Taotai has already fallen. I know that you were all forced by him. Killing your master is not what you want. If you submit immediately, the new master of Kunlun will let bygones be bygones. Nian Qi also said loudly, those who surrender will not be killed. With the pride of the night spirit, he would never say such words. Even if he died in battle, he would not retreat or lower his head. However, in the current situation, although the Taotai was dead, there were still millions of Kunlun army left under his command. If these Kunlun army fought to the death, with their strength, they would not be able to resist at all. The night spirit was also an arrow at the end of its flight and could not hold on for long. More importantly, the situation at the canyon was unknown. The most important thing for them was to end the battle here as soon as possible and rush to the God-slaying canyon to help Su Zimo. God-slaying canyon. In the Army of Light, the number of Protoss casualties was still increasing. Su Zimo wielded the Mystic Magnet Mountain and the Spellbreaker Bow, two ancient unique treasures. With his strength, he almost defeated the Army of Light. These cold and indifferent Protoss knights finally revealed a trace of fear in their eyes. In this short period of time, more than 400 Protoss knights had died under Su Zimo's Spellbreaker Bow. No one knew who the next Protoss to die would be. After shooting more than 400 magic power arrows consecutively, Su Zimo's essence divinity could not hold on any longer. Everyone listen to my command. Take off your armor and put away your swords and shields. The half-ancestor Protoss finally thought of a solution and shouted, even if we are bare-handed, we can still kill this person. The other Protoss also reacted. They were now in such a situation and could not advance or retreat. The most important thing was that their bodies were restricted by the Mystic Magnet Mountain. If they took off their armor and put away their swords and shields, although their defense and attack power would be greatly reduced, they could still break free from the Mystic Magnet Mountain's restraint. In this way, relying on the Protoss's physical body and bloodline, even without armor, swords, and shields, they could still kill that weak human. How could a human's bloodline be mentioned in the same breath as a Protoss? At this thought, ecstasy appeared in the eyes of the Protoss. Su Zimo also smiled. His essence divinity could not hold on any longer after continuously pulling the Spellbreaker Bow. He was about to let his essence divinity rest when the Protoss could not hold on and changed their tactics. That's good. Su Zimo smiled and took out a few essence divinity recovery pills from his storage bag and swallowed them. At the same time, the Creation Lotus platform supported the black-haired essence divinity in his sea of consciousness and spun slowly, spewing out rays of green light to nourish the black-haired essence divinity. With the help of the Creation Lotus platform, no one could compare to Su Zimo in terms of essence divinity recovery. The Dragon Phoenix True Body's explosive power and killing power were above Qinglian True Body, but in terms of essence divinity consumption, the Dragon Phoenix True Body was far inferior. The Celestial Race clansmen quickly took off their armors and stored them in their storage rings. They also put away their swords and shields. Many of the Celestials suppressed their anger. They took off their armors and regained their mobility. One after another, they turned around. Their eyes seemed to be spitting fire. Human ant, prepare to die. Don't kill him so easily. We have to suppress him and torture him bit by bit. Otherwise, our people will have died in vain. The Protoss had just turned around and wanted to charge forward to fight Su Zimo when they realized that the terrifying figure was walking toward them. Chapter 1520. A half-ancestor Protoss sneered. Well, you still dare to take the initiative to come over. You really don't know what death is. You should be the ones who don't know what death is. Su Zimo said indifferently. He didn't stop and soon arrived in front of a Protoss knight. The blood chi in this Protoss knight's body surged. With a loud shout, he raised his strong and powerful leg and swept it towards Su Zimo's head. This time, there was a buzzing sound in the air, and a series of afterimages appeared. The power of this kick was too strong and too fast. If this kick hit, this Protoss knight was confident that he could directly kick Su Zimo's head into pieces. Bang! However, just as this kick was about to hit Su Zimo's temple, a white palm appeared on this Protoss knight's leg. This Protoss knight's eyes widened as he watched this scene in disbelief. The other Protoss also had looks of disbelief in their eyes. A human actually blocked the power of a Protoss in close combat. Su Zimo stretched out his hand and grabbed the Protoss knight's ankle like an iron hoop. He smiled and said, "Is this the power of you Protoss? You're too weak." Su Zimo exerted strength in his palm and directly crushed the Protoss knight's ankle. A layer of cold sweat instantly dripped down the face of the Protoss knight, and he opened his mouth and let out a shrill scream. However, this Protoss knight was also impressive. He could still maintain his consciousness amidst the scream and didn't retreat in panic. Instead, he directly urged his blood chi and wanted to erupt with a bloodline phenomenon. Bang! Su Zimo didn't give him the chance at all. He stepped forward and punched this person's chest. The chest of this Protoss knight was instantly penetrated, and a blood arrow as thick as an arm burst out. His heart exploded, and his blood chi rapidly flowed out. This person's bloodline phenomenon had not completely condensed before it rapidly dissipated due to the severe loss of blood chi. Su Zimo's attacks did not stop. After crushing the Protoss knight's ankle, Su Zimo took a step forward and punched him in the chest. Then he raised his palm and held the man's chin. This move was a variation of the blood ape's fruit offering. Since Su Zimo had started cultivating, he was no longer restricted to a single move. He created the martial scripture, which made him invincible in close combat. Every punch or palm, every movement of his contained profound mysteries. The Protoss knight's head was flung to the back, its neck bone shattered. A primordial spirit escaped from the head of the Protoss knight with a panicked expression. However, before he could completely escape from his corporeal body, he saw Su Zimo blow gently. A white light flashed and cut his primordial spirit into two. With Su Zimo's current physical body, blood chi, and powerful internal organs, a casual exhalation of his breath was like a flying sword, not inferior to a divine weapon. The two of them exchanged blows so quickly that it only took a few breaths. This Protoss knight's every move seemed to be within Su Zimo's expectations. He was completely restrained and could not fight back. The other Protoss were not far away. By the time the Protoss reacted, this Protoss knight was already dead. Arrogant ant. How dare you! The deities were furious, and they all berated him. Su Zimo sneered and said, "What noble race, what powerful civilization. That's all there is to it." Su Zimo's feet landed heavily on the ground. Boom! In an instant, the earth shook. "Today, I'll let you see my Araki Takashi's methods." Su Zimo roared and circulated his blood chi. The sound of waves came from his body as he charged toward a half-martial ancestor Protoss. This Protoss half-martial ancestor relied on his cultivation realm to be half a level higher than Su Zimo. He was fearless and also circulated his blood chi and punched towards Su Zimo. Bang! The two fists collided. Endless pain appeared on the Protoss half-martial ancestor's face. He couldn't help but grunt and retreat subconsciously. This head-on collision numbed his entire arm. "I was careless." The Protoss half-martial ancestor was alarmed. I should have directly used my bloodline phenomenon. You have no chance. Su Zimo's eyes lit up as he suddenly spoke and released a sound domain's secret technique. His voice was like thunder, instantly exploding in the Protoss half-martial ancestor's ears. The two of them were too close to each other. This loud roar shook the Protoss half-martial ancestor's ears until they buzzed. There was a boom in his mind, and his consciousness paused for a short moment. This momentary pause was enough to determine Su Zimo's life and death. Su Zimo stretched out his finger and poked the Protoss half-martial ancestor's glabella. A bloody hole appeared. Blood gushed out. The Protoss half-martial ancestor had just recovered from thunderclap kill when he discovered that his consciousness was gradually sinking. Below him was a boundless abyss of darkness. The Protoss half-martial ancestor's vitality disappeared. His eyes were unfocused and he fell straight down. His divine spirit was destroyed, and he died on the spot. In less than 10 breaths, 2 Protoss were dead. One of them was even a Protoss half-martial ancestor. Su Zimo's massacre had just begun. His figure flickered, and he directly crashed into the crowd of Protoss. He was like a fierce horse, rampaging without any scruples. A Protoss knight wanted to block Su Zimo's path, but he was sent flying by Su Zimo. His physical body exploded in midair, turning into a cloud of blood mist. Only his primordial spirit escaped. The other Protoss knights couldn't stop Su Zimo's footsteps. Everywhere he passed, people were thrown off their feet. No one could withstand his sharpness. The entire army of light was completely scattered by Su Zimo. These Protoss knights put away their armor, swords, and shields, and became barehanded. Su Zimo was also barehanded. However, Su Zimo's physical body was the body of the 7th-stage creation Qinglian, which was equivalent to a Khanate Mighty Figure's Dharma artifact. Although these Protoss's physical bodies and bloodlines were powerful, they couldn't withstand the power of the 7th-stage creation Qinglian. Without the protection of their armor, these Protoss regained their freedom of movement. However, their casualties were even more tragic as they fought Su Zimo in close combat. If they were hit by the creation Qinglian, they would either die or be injured. Not long after, close to 100 Protoss died under the Mystic Magnet Mountain. The army of light formed by thousands of prodigies and monsters from the continent of gods was slaughtered until they fled in all directions. Only about 500 people were left. Everyone, don't panic. Listen to my command. The leader of the Protoss commanders finally couldn't hold it in anymore. He stood up again and used his divine consciousness to continuously transmit voice transmissions to command the remaining Protoss knights. If more than 500 Protoss knights were to gather together, they would still be an extremely terrifying force. Under the command of the Protoss commanders, the numerous Protoss knights gradually formed an encirclement around Su Zimo. A hint of mockery flashed across Su Zimo's eyes. He didn't break out of the encirclement and just allowed them to surround him. Chapter 1521. Seeing that the encirclement was about to take shape, the Protoss leader suddenly shouted, "Everyone, activate your bloodline avatars." With a single order. Boom, boom, boom. Ancient and majestic pyramids appeared beneath the Protoss. Billions of living beings knelt around each pyramid, praying devoutly as they looked up at the Protoss at the top of the pyramid. An endless stream of power surged into the Protoss's body. The auras of the Protoss continued to rise. This was the terror of Protoss. Once a Protoss bloodline awakened, even without cultivation, they would produce bloodline avatars. More than 500 pyramids floated in midair, looking incomparably shocking. The figures of the Protoss slowly rose, becoming indistinguishable from heaven and earth. An unimaginably enormous pressure descended upon them. Qinglian's true body was somewhat unable to withstand this pressure. The bones in her body creaked as if they were about to fall apart. Ah! Su Zimo roared into the sky. The aura in his body continued to rise, reaching a peak in the blink of an eye. Su Zimo's figure seemed to have disappeared, becoming faintly discernible. A jade-green Qinglian that soared into the sky appeared in his original spot. This Qinglian was crystal clear, jade-like, and filled with endless light. Under the gazes of the gods, a lotus flower slowly bloomed at the top of this Qinglian, bursting forth with auspicious colors. This is. The gods looked up, shock in their eyes. If they had already become one with heaven and earth, indistinguishable from each other, then the power of this Qinglian had already broken through heaven and earth. All of a sudden, the Qinglian swayed gently. Heaven and earth trembled as ripples appeared in the void. It was as if a pebble had fallen into a calm lake. The ripples were weak and spread toward the 500 ancient pyramids in the surroundings. A terrifying scene occurred. This seemingly weak ripple swept past the pyramids, causing cracks to appear on the pyramids. The cracks rapidly expanded and spread. Rumble! The pyramids shattered, collapsed, and turned into nothingness under the influence of the ripples. Many Protoss were shocked. If it was 20 years ago, Su Zimo's bloodline phenomenon wouldn't have been able to withstand so many Protoss phenomena. However, after absorbing and refining the carefree wood, Su Zimo's Qinglian true body grew crazily. Be it in terms of strength or bloodline, they both had obvious leaps and bounds. Right now, Qinglian's true body was approaching the 8th grade creation realm, Qinglian. Although there was still some distance between them, it was no longer out of reach. Of course, Su Zimo's bloodline phenomenon wasn't able to suppress all 500 pyramids. However, after destroying more than 200 pyramids, Su Zimo's Qinglian avatar could no longer hold on. However, this was already enough. More than 200 pyramids collapsed, and the encirclement of many Protoss collapsed in an instant. Su Zimo sneered. His figure appeared again, turning into a golden light. He arrived in front of a Protoss knight and struck with a backhand palm. The Protoss knight's bloodline phenomenon collapsed, and his blood essence fluctuated. Before he could react, Su Zimo had already arrived in front of him. "You!" The Protoss only had time to say one word before he hurriedly raised his arms, wanting to block Su Zimo's power. Crack! Su Zimo's palm directly broke the Protoss's arms. His palm pressed down and slapped the person's head. The person's essence spirit was instantly shattered, and his body fell from midair. The other Protoss reacted and attacked. However, Su Zimo's figure flickered again, and he disappeared from the spot. When he reappeared, he was beside another Protoss, a half-martial ancestor. He did the same thing and released a killing move. The two of them fought speed and exchanged 3 to 4 rounds. The half-martial ancestor Protoss's face was pale. He finally couldn't hold on anymore. All of a sudden, specks of golden light surged in the eyes of the half-martial ancestor Protoss. In the blink of an eye, his eyes turned completely golden. They were cold and emotionless with endless might, as though they were going to judge all the sins in the world. God's eye. Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat. Back in the battle of Myriad Phenomenon City, he had fought against the Protoss. That Protoss had cultivated the God's Eye technique, which was extremely similar to the scene before him. Of course, even Su Zimo felt his heart palpitate when the half-martial ancestor Protoss released God's Eye. The God's Eye of the half-martial ancestor Protoss actually contained a trace of divine power. Su Zimo was alarmed. He didn't dare to be careless. Ethereal wings, lightning escape, and earth-traversing golden light burst forth at the same time. He retreated and flashed continuously, trying to avoid the power of the God's Eye. Even a rank 7 creation cultivator like Qinglian might not be able to withstand a God's Eye that contained a trace of divine power. However, Su Zimo didn't dare to take the risk. There were still more than 500 Protoss here. There was also the legendary Dark Army behind them. If Qinglian's true body was severely injured because of this God's Eye, the losses would outweigh the gains. The half-martial ancestor Protoss was also extremely smart. Seeing that Su Zimo was using his escape technique to escape, he wasn't in a hurry to release his eye technique. Instead, he constantly closed the distance between him and Su Zimo. He knew very well that if he released this eye technique, it would no longer be a threat to Su Zimo. However, if he didn't release it and continued to stare at Su Zimo, there would always be a sharp sword hanging above Su Zimo's head, and it would slash down at any time. Su Zimo would definitely be restrained. The other Protoss also noticed this scene. They all took action and cooperated with the half-martial ancestor Protoss. Some Protoss propped up their bloodline avatars and surrounded Su Zimo. Some Protoss also activated their eye techniques. Their eyes flickered with golden light. They focused on Su Zimo and kept closing the distance between them and Su Zimo. Those who could join the army of light were all monsters on the continent of gods. Every Protoss knight had cultivated a god's eye. More than 1,000 golden eyes were all focused on him. Su Zimo only felt his scalp tingle and his hair stand on end. In the blink of an eye, the situation had quietly changed. The remaining 500-odd Protoss gradually took control of the situation. Qinglian's true body was forged by Su Zimo. Although she had cultivated the fiend's sex eye techniques, they weren't strong and couldn't compete with God's eye at all. The terrifying thing about eye techniques was that they were instantaneous. Without any warning, the moment Su Zimo let down his guard, a visual technique had already descended. Pissed! Su Zimo dodged by a hair's breadth. The eye technique landed on the canyon rocks behind him and instantly punched 2 bottomless holes. Under the pressure of some Protoss bloodline avatars, Su Zimo's space to dodge became smaller and smaller. Pissed! Another 2 eye techniques descended. Su Zimo's body had already distorted to an unimaginable degree before he could dodge the 2 eye techniques. The 2 eye techniques tore through the air and hit the skeleton of a massive demon beast. Was this the purple from the primordial era? Neon retort. Chapter 1522. A divine eye that could easily penetrate Dharma artifacts landed on purple? Intersection Shi? Waving Xian Pi to kidnap Mianhuan hashtag? Genesis? Vulgar? Yi? Many Protoss were originally surrounding Su Zimo. He sensed that above the canyon, purple? Blowing in? Huanghui? Vanadium Zhu? Bin? Dianbian? Bianbian? Primordial God? Mi Muji Dan? Ya? Buanciamo? You still? Buanciamo? Shui Xen Pai Tongod? Chao Lu Fan? CMO Chen? Actually, the so-called abnormality was just this purple? Na CMO? Fuji Dan? The stone was the size of a goose egg and as black as ink. From above the canyon, it fell towards Su Zimo. Su Zimo swept his gaze over and was slightly stunned. For some reason, this stone gave him a feeling of déjà vu. This stone was too common. Not to mention Kunlun ruins, it could be seen everywhere on Tianhuang mainland. However, the moment Su Zimo saw the stone, an indescribable feeling arose in his heart. He instinctively reached out and caught the stone. However, just as he touched the stone, it suddenly disappeared. It was as if it had entered his body through his palm. This feeling, Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat. He suddenly recalled the illumination stone that he picked up when he first met Master Extreme Fire in Songlang Mountain Range. The 2 situations were almost the same. Suddenly, Su Zimo felt a sharp pain in his mind. Yes. Su Zimo groaned and lowered his head slightly. His whole body was curled up and trembling. The Protoss didn't know what had happened to Su Zimo, but this was the best time for them to strike. The leading Protoss half-martial ancestor widened his golden eyes. His divine eyes were focused and ready to attack. Now that he saw such an opportunity, he immediately unleashed his godly eye technique without hesitation. He was not the only one who had such a reaction. The Protoss in the Army of Light were all prodigies and monsters. Sensing this rare opportunity, they all attacked. One after another, ocular techniques tore through the air. In an instant, hundreds of golden lights crossed the void and shot towards Su Zimo. Most of the golden light was aimed at Su Zimo's head. Some of them were aimed at Su Zimo's vital points. A small portion of the golden light was aimed at Su Zimo's surroundings, sealing off all the space he could dodge. More than 500 Protoss attacked and unleashed their godly eye techniques. Rays of golden light formed an impenetrable net that enveloped Su Zimo. The eruption of an eye technique was instantaneous to begin with. It was very difficult to dodge. Moreover, Su Zimo was standing on the spot with his head lowered. He didn't move at all, as if he couldn't sense the danger at all. Suddenly, the moment the golden lights descended, Su Zimo raised his head abruptly. There was no white in his left eye at all. It was pitch black. It didn't seem to be an eye. Instead, it was an endless dark abyss that emitted a chilling aura. It seemed to be the eye of a demon god. All the golden light descending on Su Zimo seemed to be frozen and froze in midair. A trace of frost appeared on the golden light. Boom, boom, boom. Suddenly, the thousands of golden lights shattered and turned into nothingness. The power of the pitch-black eye was reflected back. The expressions of the Protoss changed. They felt that their eyes were invaded by an extremely chilling power, and they couldn't move their eyeballs. Their gazes were all frozen in his eyes. The next moment, they couldn't see at all. Cracks appeared in the eyes of the gods and turned into ice crystals that flowed out of their eye sockets. It was terrifying. The gods' eyes were blind. Some Protoss and half-martial ancestors relied on the divine power contained in their godly eye to protect their eyes. However, the eyes of these Protoss and half-martial ancestors were also in unbearable pain, and tears kept flowing out of them. The gods panicked and let out a series of screams. Nether fluorescent eye. Is it that god from back then? Ao Gigi? One of the Protoss demi-ancestors seemed to have thought of something. Deep fear flashed through his eyes, and his voice trembled slightly. At that instant, the darkness in Su Zimo's left eye gradually disappeared and returned to normal, as if nothing had happened. Back at the bottom of the Dragon Burial Valley, when the red-headed ghost imparted the Illumination Dragon Eye to Su Zimo, he had mentioned the legends of illumination and nether glow. Su Zimo did not expect that the inconspicuous pitch-black stone was actually a fluorescent stone. The illumination stone and the nether fluorite were both in the Kunlun ruins. The candlelight sword formation in the candlelight stone was actually left behind by Fairy Linglong back then. It was placed in the Linglong mystic realm and was later accidentally brought to Tianhuang region by extreme fire. And within this nether fluorescent stone, there was also a secret technique. Was this the same purple from back then? Donai? Scratch? When this serene fluorite entered Su Zimo's left eye, the eye technique of the serene fluorite had already entered Su Zimo's mind. In such a short period of time, Su Zimo naturally couldn't cultivate this eye technique. Just now, it was only because the gods' eyes of the gods had stimulated the serene fluorescent stone and caused it to counterattack. Su Zimo's Qinglian true body did not have any powerful eye techniques. Now that he had obtained this nether fluorescent stone, it could be considered as making up for this flaw. The might of a primordial taboo ocular technique could be imagined. It was as if everything was arranged by fate. God? Yao Yu Greya? Shantao Clam? Piao 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 Piao? Windowsill? Zhao Yu? Badger Nan Lu Nai. Su Zimo turned around and looked at the top of the canyon, at the god who stood with his back to heaven wasteland. Yi? Gully New frostbite course? Could it be that the bones were broken and the ammonia was cracked? Judge model? Bowing? Changxing Meng Piao Luo Jianma. Su Zimo suddenly turned around and charged into the crowd of the Army of Light again, erupting with a fierce attack. The gods were blinded. They only needed to recuperate for a little while to regrow their vision. However, Su Zimo did not give them the chance at all. His attacks were fierce, ruthless, and decisive. In 2 or 3 rounds, he would definitely be able to kill a Protoss. In close combat, even a Protoss half-martial ancestor could not stop Qinglian true body. One by one, the Protoss fell, never to stand up again. This scene was just like the primordial era. These Protoss were forever buried in this canyon. The number of Protoss knights was rapidly decreasing. More than 400. More than 300. The Army of Light, which originally had more than 1,000 people, was only left with 200 people by Su Zimo. At this moment, terrifying auras burst out from the 5-colored cave again. A dark and cold energy entered the Kunlun ruins. Protoss walked in one after another. These Protoss also had blonde hair and blue eyes, but they did not have armor on their bodies. Instead, they wore black robes and did not have mounts under their feet. They held crystalline staffs in their hands. When these Protoss entered the canyon, it was as if a pitch-black cloud was surging over. The Dark Army had arrived. Chapter 1523. The Protoss leader of the Darkness Army was a middle-aged man with a gloomy expression. He had short hair, a thin face, and sharp eyes. He held a staff and waved it slowly in front of him. The many black-robed Protoss behind him also waved their staffs. Streaks of pitch-black mist filled the air like billowing thick smoke that contained dark and icy cold energy enveloped the profound Magnet Mountain. The sky darkened instantly. It was as if the world was shrouded in darkness. The temperature plummeted. In the blink of an eye, the mystic Magnet Mountain was enveloped by the black fog. Su Zimo frowned slightly. Darkness descended. He had already lost control of the mystic Magnet Mountain. However, he could clearly feel that the mystic Magnet Mountain's power was rapidly weakening under the black fog. "Everyone, the Darkness Army is here." The Protoss leader shouted, "Put on your armor, take out your weapons, and shatter this mountain. Let's kill our way out." The remaining 200-odd Protoss were invigorated. Although some of the Protoss knights' eyes had yet to recover, they took out their armor, swords, and shields from their storage bags and used their powerful divine senses to launch a fierce counterattack. The swords and shields of these Protoss were extremely strong and hard. Even the Spellbreaker bow could not penetrate them. Even Su Zimo's Qinglian true form did not dare to face them head-on. These Protoss were wearing armor and holding swords and shields. They quickly formed an airtight defensive formation and blocked Su Zimo outside. In all fairness, if not for the mystic Magnet Mountain and the Spellbreaker bow, Su Zimo would not have been able to withstand the power of the entire Light Army despite his monstrous combat strength. Now, the Darkness Army had descended. Su Zimo was about to face a tough battle. Su Zimo retreated and temporarily distanced himself from the remaining Light Army. He swallowed another spirit pill and slowly recovered his strength. Just now in this battle, Su Zimo had fought many Protoss in close combat. Under the nourishment of the Creation Lotus platform and the Spirit Pill, his essence spirit had recovered nearly 70%. This was the terrifying self-healing ability of Qinglian true form, and also one of the miraculous manifestations of Qinglian creation. If Su Zimo took out the Spellbreaker bow now, he could shoot hundreds of magic power arrows again. Boom, boom, boom. After the Light Army forced Su Zimo back, they did not continue to advance toward the Kunlun ruins. Instead, they turned around and continuously attacked the mystic Magnet Mountain. This sort of action originated from fear towards the profound Magnet Mountain, and also from anger towards it. Every divine knight in the Army of Light couldn't forget the fact that they were treated as live targets under the cover of this mountain. They fell down one by one, but they couldn't do anything about it. Although the Dark Army had taken action, the gods were still worried. Moreover, they wanted to vent the anger in their hearts. Deep in the hearts of the 200-odd Protoss knights, they no longer dared to attack Su Zimo. They could only charge at the mystic Magnet Mountain. Behind the mystic Magnet Mountain, the Protoss commander of the Dark Army gave the order. Many Protoss waved their staffs and condensed dark spears, throwing them at the mystic Magnet Mountain. The two extreme powers of light and darkness erupted on the mystic Magnet Mountain. Boom! The earth shook and the mountains shook. It was deafening. This power represented the peak of the continent of gods, enough to destroy the world. Su Zimo's gaze focused. He clearly saw that numerous cracks had appeared on the 3,000-meter-tall body of the profound Magnet Mountain, and they were expanding and spreading bit by bit. The mystic Magnet Mountain shattered. This ancient treasure was still unable to withstand the impact of the Protoss civilization and was destroyed in the God-slaying canyon. However, this ancient treasure had already completed its mission. It was precisely because of its existence that the Light Army was defeated by Su Zimo. Rumble! The mystic Magnet Mountain collapsed. Countless gravel rolled down and collapsed, and dust billowed. The God-slaying canyon was reopened. The remaining 200-odd Protoss of the Light Army rushed toward the Dark Army as if they were fleeing for their lives. "How did this happen?" asked the Dark Army commander with a frown. "That person." A Protoss knight pointed at Su Zimo, who was not far away in the canyon. He swallowed his saliva and said, "That person is blocking us. We can't go through." "Only one person?" The Dark Army commander frowned even more deeply as he asked in disbelief. The Protoss knight recalled the scene that had happened just now and still had lingering fear. He said, "Although he's alone, but—" "Ha!" The Dark Army commander suddenly laughed and asked somewhat mockingly, "And he's a human?" The Protoss knight was speechless. The Dark Army commander snorted coldly. "Your light army is getting worse and worse. You're actually blocked in the canyon by a lowly and weak human. This is a disgrace to us pros. Everyone follow me. Let's kill this human," said the Dark Army commander with a cold expression. He led the many black-robed Protoss behind him and slowly walked toward Su Zimo. After pausing for a while, the Dark Army commander looked sideways at the pale and frightened Protoss knights and sneered. "As for you guys, slowly heal here. If you're really scared, scram back to the continent of gods. Don't embarrass the Protoss. You." The many Protoss knights of the Light Army widened their eyes in anger. The Divine Race commander of the Radiance Army wore a gloomy face. He waved his hand and said, "There's no need to argue. The enemy is right in front of us. The two great armies of the Divine Race can't fight among themselves. Your Dark Army should be careful." "Ha!" The Dark Army commander curled his lips and sneered. "It's just a human. What kind of enemy is he?" The Light Protoss commander wanted to say something but stopped. He wanted to remind the Dark Army commander that the human had a bow with terrifying killing power. But on second thought, that human must have used up a lot of energy to pull that bow. He shouldn't have much strength left. Moreover, the Dark Army commander's mockery made him a little unhappy. He snorted and didn't say anything else. "Human ant, I'll send you to hell." The Dark Army commander waved the staff in his hand, and black fog spread out. The black-robed Protoss behind him also waved their staffs and chanted many strange characters and syllables. The black fog fell into the god-slaying canyon, and a terrifying scene happened. The Protoss knights of the Light Army that had just fallen stood up one by one. Some Protoss knights even lost their heads. Some Protoss knights had lost their arms. Some of the Divine Knights had lost half of their bodies, but they were still able to stand up, trembling. But these Protoss knights, shrouded in black fog, seemed to come alive. They turned around and stared at Su Zimo. Their eyes were pitch black, and they emitted a powerful aura. The Protoss knights climbed up from the pool of blood and corpses one after another. Su Zimo's expression was solemn. He could feel that these Protoss knights had already fallen. There was no life aura or fluctuation in their bodies. The resurrection of these Protoss knights was only summoned and controlled by these black-robed Protoss with some mysterious power. Indeed, Su Zimo had never heard of or seen such a strange method before. Chapter 1524. Su Zimo's expression did not change. Although he was unfamiliar with the Protoss's methods, there were thousands of spells and 3,000 great Daos, and they all had similarities. Placing his palms together, Su Zimo lowered his head and chanted a long paragraph of obscure sutras in Sanskrit. The Sanskrit contained a profound and mysterious power. Su Zimo's body was also gradually covered with a layer of sacred Buddhist light. His entire person became dignified, and his aura was transcendent. Great Light Mantra, Hearing Liberation Mantra, Great Enlightenment Mantra, 6 Vajra Mantra. These 4 mantras did not have much attack power. They were only used by Buddhists to release the souls of the dead and relieve resentment. Many Protoss knights came back from the dead, wearing armor and holding swords and shields. Even if Su Zimo fought head-on and suppressed these Protoss knights, they would rise again. Unless they were smashed to pieces, they were almost immortal under the secret techniques of the black-robed Protoss. However, if the Buddhist mantra was used to expel the dark power in these Protoss knights, these Protoss knights would naturally fall silent again. This was a confrontation between 2 cultivation civilizations. The Dark Army commander frowned slightly as he looked at the scene in the canyon. A look of surprise flashed across his eyes. The Protoss Knights that came back from the dead were originally emitting monstrous killing intent. They gathered together again and prepared to charge at Su Zimo. However, after these 4 mantras descended, the black fog in the eyes of these Protoss Knights gradually dissipated. After losing this dark power, these Protoss Knights that came back from the dead collapsed again. Interesting. The Dark Army commander smiled and said, I didn't expect a human ant like you to have some tricks up your sleeve. However, if you want to fight against my Dark Army with your own strength, that's a fool's dream. The Dark Army commander waved his staff. Streaks of black fog emerged from the staff again. The many black-robed Protoss in the Dark Army also began to augment their magic power. Streaks of dark power descended and contended against Su Zimo's Buddhist secret incantation. The power of darkness was endless. This was not a one-on-one fight. Just as the Dark Army commander had said, Su Zimo alone could not withstand the power of the entire Dark Army. The secret Buddhist incantations were indeed effective against the dark forces controlled by the Protoss. But the Dark Army had over 1,000 people. The eruption of the dark energy was too powerful. Su Zimo's Buddhist secret incantation was soon unable to hold on under this unending stream of dark energy. The Protoss Knight that had fallen was about to rise from the ashes. A cold light flashed in Su Zimo's eyes. If this continued, the one who would be defeated would definitely be him. Instead of fighting a war of attrition with the Dark Army, it was better to take drastic measures and directly kill the Protoss of the Dark Army, cutting off the source of the Dark Army's power. At this thought, Su Zimo patted his storage bag and took out a jade-green bow. It was an ancient treasure, the Spellbreaker bow. In the distance, the Light Army commander's expression changed when he saw the Spellbreaker bow. He hurriedly shouted, "Be careful of that bow." The Dark Army commander sneered. "It's just a broken bow. Even if this bow is powerful, how many people can it kill in my army?" The way he saw it, the time it took for the bow to fire an arrow was enough for him to attack and kill this human 10 times, no, 100 times. Su Zimo did not say a word. He drew the bow and formed an arrow. A magic power arrow pierced through the air and arrived in front of the Dark Army commander in an instant. Shield of Darkness. The Dark Army commander did not move. He waved his staff unhurriedly, and a huge pitch-black shield quickly formed in front of him. He was confident that this shield of darkness could block all attacks below the Mahayana realm. Furthermore, his opponent was merely a mighty figure of the human race. He did not notice that there was a look of mockery in Su Zimo's eyes at that moment. The Spellbreaker bow could break all skills with a single arrow. All dermic arts were nothing in the face of the Spellbreaker bow. What was even more frightening was that the dermic power arrow released by the Spellbreaker bow could not only break through skills, it could also absorb dermic powers to strengthen itself. In other words, the stronger the dermic power of the Dark Army commander's Shield of Darkness, the more terrifying the power of the dermic power arrow was, the more terrifying it would be. When the dermic power arrow struck the Shield of Darkness, there was no earth-shattering sound. Instead, it seemed as though it had pierced through flesh. The pupils of the Dark Army commander constricted. Right in front of him, the Shield of Darkness was pierced by the dermic power arrow in the blink of an eye. Furthermore, all the dermic powers of the Shield of Darkness were absorbed by the dermic power arrow. This magic power arrow became as black as ink and thickened by a large circle. It was no longer an arrow. It was a gigantic pitch-black spear. Back then, Su Zimo knew nothing about the Spellbreaker bow. When the dermic power arrow pierced through Qinglian's true body, the Dark Army commander could not dodge it either. It was too close. When the dermic power arrow broke through the Shield of Darkness and transformed into a pitch-black spear, it had already pierced his chest. Blood gushed out. The Dark Army commander's eyes widened. He lowered his head slightly and looked at the bloody hole in his chest that was as thick as an arm. His eyes were filled with disbelief. The pitch-black spear directly pierced through his body. The terrifying power almost tore his body apart. Fortunately, he was a half-ancestor powerhouse among the Protoss. His bloodline was powerful and condensed, so he was able to resist the terrifying power of the pitch-black spear and protect his body. Even so, his internal organs had already been shattered. If the Dark Army commander was already like this, then the black-robed Protoss behind him were even more miserable. The black spear pierced through the Dark Army commander's body. Its power was not exhausted. It pierced through 5 black-robed Protoss in a row before it stopped and the dermic power dissipated. Bang, bang, bang. The bodies of the 5 black-robed Protoss exploded one after another, turning into clouds of blood mist. The primordial spirits of the 5 black-robed Protoss were shattered by the black spear. Not even their bones were left. Their bodies and souls were destroyed, and they died on the spot. When facing the Light Army, even with the help of the Mystic Magnet Mountain, one dermic power arrow could only kill one Protoss Knight at most. However, the dermic breaker bow was almost destructive to the Protoss of the Dark Army. How could this be? The Dark Army commander's eyes were somewhat confused. The warning of the Light Army commander seemed to be echoing in his ears. Be careful of that bow. The second arrow descended. The Dark Army commander was heavily injured. Before he could react, under the gaze of many Protoss, the second dermic power arrow pierced through his head and destroyed his primordial spirit. The Dark Army commander had fallen. This dermic power arrow's power was not exhausted. It shot toward another black-robed Protoss. This black-robed Protoss subconsciously condensed a dermic power, and a pitch-black spear appeared in front of him. He wanted to meet the attack with attack and block the dermic power arrow. However, his spear was absorbed by the dermic power arrow in the blink of an eye. The dermic power arrow's power became even more powerful and violent, directly killing this person on the spot. Chapter 1525. Magical power arrows pierced through the air and shot into the Dark Army. Every magic power arrow could cause great damage. It could kill at least 3 or 4 people before it dissipated and stopped. At first, the Protoss of the Dark Army kept condensing spells to resist. However, they soon discovered that the spells they released were completely useless in front of the long arrows that were shot over. No matter how powerful the spells were, they would be broken by the arrows. Moreover, the magical power from the dissipated spells would be absorbed by the arrows to strengthen their power and cause greater damage. Before this, the Army of Light had been falling one by one under the Spellbreaker bow. Now, with the sound of the Spellbreaker bow, the Dark Army fell one by one. Without the protection of armor, the Protoss of the Dark Army suffered heavy casualties under the Spellbreaker bow. In the blink of an eye, Su Zimo had shot hundreds of arrows. And the Dark Army only had 400 Protoss left. These Protoss fled as if they had gone mad. They were in an even worse state than the Army of Light just now. The remaining 200 Protoss of the Army of Light also hurriedly stepped forward. Many Protoss Knights set up giant golden shields in front of them, forming an impenetrable defense to protect the Dark Army behind them. Clang, clang, clang. The magical power arrows hit these giant golden shields and exploded with a loud bang. Sparks flew everywhere, and the Army of Light's formation was in chaos. Don't panic, people. As long as we work together and our formation is not messed up, we can definitely block this Araki Takashi's arrows. Under the command of the Light Protoss commander, the Army of Light quickly stabilized their formation. Although the Army of Light only had 200 people left, they relied on the indestructible giant golden shields to form a defensive formation. Su Zimo's Spellbreaker bow could not penetrate their defense. Where did this human come from? How can he be so powerful? A black-robed Protoss who had escaped asked with lingering fear. I heard that his name is Araki Takashi. We don't know anything else. A Protoss Knight coldly replied. Another Protoss Knight couldn't help but mock. Wasn't the Dark Army just now very arrogant? Why are you so scared now? This human is nothing. It's just that his bow is too scary. A black-robed Protoss hurriedly explained. However, this explanation seemed extremely weak, and it even caused a wave of ridicule. Enough! The Radiant Protoss commander shouted, Our Radiant Corps will block this human's attack from the front. Your Dark Corps will attack from the back. Our two corps will cooperate and slowly push forward. Normally speaking, when the godly continent invaded other continents, the two armies would work together to advance, and it would be successful. But this colorful cave was occupied by an ancient god? Han El-Shua. Jean Lu Miao frowned? Lin? Invading the desolate lands and embracing each other happily? Now, under the command of the Radiance Army's commander, the two armies slowly advanced in the direction of the god-butchering canyon. Su Zimo frowned slightly. The army of light raised their giant golden shields in front of them, protecting him and the dark army behind them. This made him feel like he did not know where to start. Even the exorcism bow couldn't penetrate the Radiant Corps' defense. Up till this point of his cultivation, Su Zimo had experienced countless battles. However, he had never experienced such a difficult feeling before. However, he thought of the two gods standing proudly on both sides of the canyon. Thinking of Night Spirit, Extreme Fire, Nian Qi, and the others behind him, a sense of heroism rose in his heart. His gaze became more determined, and his killing intent was about to burst out. Facing the two slowly advancing armies, Su Zimo stepped into the air and actually walked toward them. With every step he took, his killing intent increased by a bit. The sky changed color. A vast starry sky appeared in the sky above the god-butchering canyon. However, all the stars in this starry sky seemed to be affected by something. Their trajectories were chaotic, and some stars even collided with each other, causing the entire sky to tremble. Killing intent soared into the sky, disrupting the void. Just as Su Zimo's killing intent was about to condense into substance, a star in the sky actually fell and smashed toward the two armies. Boom! An earth-shattering boom rang out. The power that erupted from the falling star was incomparably terrifying. Even if more than 200 Protoss Knights joined forces, they couldn't withstand the impact. One golden shield after another was smashed away by this falling star. Many Protoss Knights were sent flying. However, these Protoss Knights were still wearing heavy armor. Even if they suffered such an impact, they were fine and quickly stood up. Meanwhile, the Dark Corps was almost unscathed under the protection of the Radiant Corps. At this moment, Su Zimo's eyes shone brightly. He turned into a golden light and rushed over, crashing into the middle of the two armies. Su Zimo condensed sword fingers, and dazzling sword energy burst out from his body. It wasn't one, but two sword energies. It wasn't 100, but 1,000. It wasn't 10,000 either. After absorbing and refining the Warriorless Wood, Su Zimo's power of essence spirit increased and his comprehension of the heaven-slaying sword art deepened. If he released it at full strength, he could release as many as 108,000 sword chi in an instant. This kind of explosion was almost at the level of destruction. The three great ancient sword techniques represented the Tao of killing. 108,000 swords was almost the pinnacle of killing. Even a Dermic Breaker bow would find it difficult to break through the armor of the Protoss Knights. However, the heaven-slaying sword chi was different. 108,000 sword chi were released densely, blotting out the skies and penetrating every orifice. Even though the Protoss Knights were wearing armor, it wasn't flawless. Although the armor could withstand most of the sword chi, as long as one or two sword chi entered their bodies through the gaps in the armor, it would be enough to cause severe injuries to the Protoss. If the heaven-slaying sword chi entered their consciousness, even the half-martial ancestor experts of the Protoss could only die. Clang, clang, clang. The sound of the heaven-slaying sword chi striking the Pantheon armor echoed. But after the 108,000 sword chis burst out, even more Celestials were riddled with holes. They didn't even have the chance to escape before they died. Some Protoss hid behind the gigantic golden shield and escaped by chance. The gigantic golden shield was also pierced by the heaven-slaying sword chi and was completely crippled. Su Zimo stood in the middle of the valley, stepping on the corpses of the gods and panting slightly. The release of the heaven-slaying sword art this time round had almost exhausted his dermic powers, and his essence spirit was extremely weak as well. A hint of exhaustion could be seen between his brows. However, around him were the corpses of Protoss and blood flowed like rivers. All the Protoss of the Darkness Army were dead without a single survivor. There were still more than 10 Protoss left in the Light Army, and they were completely scared out of their wits. Covered in wounds, they looked at Su Zimo with endless fear in their eyes. 2 armies were almost completely wiped out. How could this be done by humans? This was practically a miracle. End of chapter. Chapter 1526. It's over. Su Zimo looked at the dozens of Protoss not far away and said coldly with an indifferent expression. Although these dozen or so celestial race experts were half-martial ancestors, they managed to survive by relying on their bloodline and fleshly body, as well as the divine ability they had comprehended and the huge shield they were wearing. However, they were already covered in wounds. More importantly, the half-martial ancestors of the Protoss were completely scared out of their wits. The initial arrogance in their eyes was no longer there, only endless fear. All of a sudden, an even more violent fluctuation came from the direction of the Rainbow Cave, as though a terrifying existence was about to charge out of the cave. The fluctuation coming from the Rainbow Cave this time round was even more terrifying than the 2 armies of the Protoss. There's more. Su Zimo's expression changed starkly. Up till this point of the battle, he had destroyed 2 armies and used all his means. His essence spirit, blood chi and dermic powers were almost exhausted to their limits. If the Protoss had any other trump cards, he would truly not be able to defend against them. It was only at this moment that Su Zimo truly understood. Taboo gods of the primordial era? Thunder Academy song proficient in resistance? Major? Selection of Moi liquid diagram in the primordial era? Countless Protoss experts entered Kunlun. Among them, there were Mahayana patriarchs and emperors. There was an endless stream. But now, the Protoss only had 2 armies without a single ancestor realm expert. Yet, he was already exhausted. Su Zimo stared at the Rainbow Cave and swallowed another bunch of elixirs. Creation Qinglian spewed out rays of light that nourished his essence spirit continuously. In fact, he did not even waste time and energy to kill the dozens of Protoss not far away. An even more difficult and dangerous battle was yet to come. Finally, the Rainbow Cave shone brightly and a massive creature flew out. Su Zimo's gaze focused. It was a gigantic demon beast that was pitch black and hundreds of feet long. Its body was covered in thick and rough scales, and there was a pair of wings on its back. Every time it flapped, it would cause a tornado. This demonic beast had the head of a dragon. Its eyes were ferocious and cold, and its claws and teeth were sharp. However, its body was like a huge lizard. It looked rather strange and was filled with a violent aura. Haha. A Protoss half-ancestor suddenly laughed and said loudly, "Araki Takashi, you're finished. Our godly continent's half-martial ancestor dragon rider has arrived." Su Zimo had seen this kind of demon beast in the pictures on the walls of the palace. It seemed to be the dragons of the godly continent. This black dragon emitted a dense demonic aura. It was actually a half-martial ancestor expert. On the back of the black dragon stood a figure with a spear in his hand. His entire body shone with a blazing golden light, like a blazing sun with a wanton might. Su Zimo could sense that this so-called half-martial ancestor dragon rider was even stronger than the commanders of the 2 armies from before. This was a half-martial ancestor expert who could subdue a divine dragon. Ant. On the back of the black dragon, the half-martial ancestor dragon rider's voice sounded, filled with endless majesty. "You killed my people. I'll trample Tianhuang mainland and kill billions of humans to pay tribute to those who died." Fufu. Su Zimo laughed and said, "Trample Tianhuang mainland? You'll have to get past me first." Facing the powerful half-martial ancestor dragon rider, Su Zimo took a deep breath. With a determined gaze, he leaped up and charged toward the half-martial ancestor dragon rider. No matter what kind of experts came from the godly continent, he would not take half a step back. Judgment Spear. The half-martial ancestor dragon rider stood on the black dragon and pointed his spear in Su Zimo's direction across the void. A resplendent spear condensed in midair and shot toward Su Zimo at an astonishing speed. This dermic art was too powerful. Before the judgment spear descended, Su Zimo felt a sharp pain on his face. Even Qinglian's true body could not withstand this dermic art. Without hesitation, Su Zimo flipped his palm and summoned the spellbreaker bow, knocking an arrow. Buzz! The bowstring trembled. The dermic power arrow shot out and collided with the judgment spear. The incomparably powerful dermic art dissipated instantly, and all the dermic powers were absorbed by the dermic power arrow. The power of the dermic power arrow increased exponentially and expanded, transforming into an even more terrifying judgment spear that shot towards the half-martial ancestor dragon rider. The half-martial ancestor dragon rider's expression did not change. The black dragon beneath him flapped its wings and roared, reaching out with a pair of dragon claws to grab the judgment spear. However, the judgment spear was the burst power of the spellbreaker bow and was fused with the power of the half-martial ancestor dragon rider. Even the black dragon could not defend against it. The judgment spear streaked across the black dragon's palm and let out a strange sound. The black dragon's claws were scraped until they were dripping with blood. Boom! Right then, a golden beam of light descended and collided with the judgment spear, causing a deafening sound. The judgment spear shattered and dissipated on the spot, turning into nothingness. It was the half-martial ancestor dragons who had attacked and blocked the judgment spear with the spear in his hands. Very strong. Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat. This half-martial ancestor dragon rider was even more troublesome than the two armies just now. Interesting, the half-martial ancestor dragon rider smiled gently and said, "To think that your bow can break my dermic art and absorb my dermic powers to strengthen itself." The half-martial ancestor dragon rider's eyesight was extremely brilliant as well. He had never seen the spellbreaker bow before. However, he managed to see through its secret in a single round. However, as dragon riders, we're not only good at dermic arts, but also melee combat. The half-martial ancestor dragon rider shouted softly, "Kill!" With that order, the black dragon flapped its wings and a gust of wind howled as it charged toward Su Zimo aggressively. The black dragon opened its mouth, wanting to devour Su Zimo. "Fight!" Su Zimo shouted, and his glabella shone as a green light burst forth. The creation lotus platform descended from the skies and smashed towards the black dragon's head. Clang! The half-martial ancestor dragon rider raised his spear and blocked the creation Qinglian. The black dragon continued to devour, and a huge shadow appeared above Su Zimo's head, blotting out the sky. Su Zimo's figure flashed and turned into a golden beam of light, escaping from the black dragon's mouth by a hair's breadth. The black dragon's mouth closed and its teeth rubbed against each other, letting out a horrifying sound. Su Zimo was secretly speechless. Even the creation Qinglian might not be able to withstand the terrifying bite of the black dragon. The half-martial ancestor dragon rider's spear descended once more. Su Zimo wielded the creation Qinglian and took it head-on. Bang! Su Zimo retreated with a pale face. The half-martial ancestor dragon rider was extremely strong. If Su Zimo was in his peak condition, it would not be a problem for him to fight against the half-martial ancestor dragon rider. But now, his essence spirit, blood chi and blood were weak and his combat strength was greatly reduced. He was actually disadvantaged against the half-martial ancestor dragon rider. Furthermore, the half-martial ancestor dragon rider was not alone. He had the help of a half-martial ancestor divine dragon. Right then, a commotion came from the five-colored cave once more. Another behemoth rushed out from within with a murderous aura and a surging dragon might, roaring. There was more than one half-martial ancestor dragon rider. A second half-martial ancestor dragon rider had arrived in Kunlun. End of chapter. Chapter 1527. Ant. The first half-martial ancestor shouted, "You won't be able to defend against the conquest of the Protoss." Is that so? Su Zimo's expression was cold. Before the second half-martial ancestor arrived, he touched his glabella with his fingertip and pulled out a lightning whip from his consciousness. It was the essence spirit's secret skill of the Thunder Emperor, the spirit vanquishing whip. Su Zimo swung the whip and whipped it towards the half-martial ancestor not far away. The half-martial ancestor's expression changed slightly. A fight between essence spirits was the most dangerous. He had not expected that the human would release an essence spirit secret skill the moment he arrived. Furthermore, the aura emitted by the lightning whip made his heart skip a beat. The half-martial ancestor dragons did not dare to be careless and hurriedly released his essence spirit secret skill as well. The black dragon beneath him conjured an essence spirit secret skill as well. The two essence spirit secret skills collided against the spirit vanquishing whip. Bolts of lightning flickered in the air, crackling chaotically. Although the spirit vanquishing whip was strong, it gradually dissipated against the essence spirit secret skills of the two half-martial ancestors. Fufu. The first half-martial ancestor had a mocking expression as he sneered, "That's all you've got?" Before the smile on his face disappeared, it froze and his expression changed starkly. Amidst the dissipating lightning, a green sword aura flashed and slashed towards the center of his eyebrows, arriving before him in an instant. Su Zimo did not only release the spirit vanquishing whip. There was also a killing technique that targeted the essence spirit, Qinglian's sword. The half-martial ancestor widened his eyes and hurriedly channeled his spirit consciousness once more, releasing a terrifying spirit consciousness in an attempt to block Qinglian's sword. A green light flashed. Qinglian's sword split the spirit consciousness released by the half-martial ancestor dragons into two and entered his glabella. A single slash destroyed his essence spirit. The half-martial ancestor dragon was clad in armor and was unscathed. However, his life force drained rapidly and his gaze dimmed. His head tilted and he fell from the black dragon's body. This was the danger of a battle between essence spirits. The slightest carelessness would result in the destruction of one's primordial spirit and the dissipation of one's Tao. The reason why Su Zimo was able to kill this half-martial ancestor dragons was not only because of the power of the deity-slaying whip and the Qinglian sword, but more importantly, because this half-martial ancestor dragons knew nothing about Su Zimo. In addition, this person had looked down on Su Zimo, resulting in such an outcome. The black dragon sensed the death of its master and let out a furious roar. It charged toward Su Zimo as if it had gone mad. The second dragon rider half-martial ancestor had also arrived. This was equivalent to 3 half-martial ancestor realm experts simultaneously launching a ferocious attack against Su Zimo, who was like an arrow at the end of its flight. Bang! Su Zimo relied on his movement technique to dodge, but in the end he was still a little too slow. The long spear swept across his chest, and he was directly sent flying. A chunk of his thigh had also been bitten off by the black dragon. Blood was dripping from his thigh. Bang! Su Zimo fell heavily to the ground, his tendons and bones on the verge of cracking. Right then, a commotion occurred in the Rainbow Cave once more. A third half-martial ancestor dragon rider charged out. Su Zimo struggled to stand up and his heart sank. He could not block it anymore. The continent of gods was far stronger than he had imagined. At that moment, the dragon phoenix's true body was cultivating in seclusion in the ancestral land of the dragons. Even he could not sense it, nor could he establish any connection with it. Right now, he could only summon Wu Dao's true body. However, even if he alarmed Wu Dao's true body now, it was already too late. It would take at least a few days for Wu Dao's true body to arrive at Kunlun ruins. By then, the Protoss would have already flattened Kunlun ruins and entered Tianhuang mainland. "Ant, you killed my master. I'll let you have a taste of the wrath of us dragons." The black dragon spoke in human language and glared at Su Zimo with ferocious eyes as black and sticky dragon saliva flowed from the corner of its mouth. Suddenly, the black dragon opened its mouth and spat out a terrifying black flame from the depths of its throat, sweeping towards Su Zimo. If it was any other time, Su Zimo would have countless methods to deal with it. He could definitely pull open the Spirit Breaker bow and break the black flame with an arrow. However, at that moment, he did not even have the strength to pull open the Spirit Breaker bow. Just as the flame was about to descend on Su Zimo, a gigantic ghostly figure suddenly appeared beside the black dragon. The gigantic demon beast extended a pair of sharp claws and grabbed the black dragon's neck. The sharp claws pierced through the scales on the black dragon's body and almost snapped its thick neck. Blood spewed out. The demon beast opened its mouth and bit down on the black dragon's head. Instantly, the black dragon's head was crushed by the terrifying demon beast. Before the black flame could descend on Su Zimo, it was extinguished rapidly and dissipated in midair. The half-martial ancestor black dragon was bitten to death. The gigantic dragon's head was bitten into a pulp and was unrecognizable. The black dragon died in a tragic manner and its massive body fell from midair. When he saw that, Su Zimo was invigorated. It was Night Spirit. Night Spirit had rushed over. Roar! Night Spirit opened its mouth and bared its menacing fangs. It charged towards the other two dragon riders and let out a deafening roar. The two half-martial ancestors of the dragons were still able to maintain their composure. However, the black dragons beneath them were so frightened that they trembled all over and almost fell from the sky. Their eyes were filled with endless fear. Against a god? Could it be a worm? Could it be a worm? Could it be a pride turtle? Although Night Spirit was covered in injuries, it was still majestic and exuded a rich killing intent that was incomparably ferocious and intimidating. What kind of dragons are you? You're nothing more than insects with wings. Night Spirit stepped on the black dragon's corpse with a murderous aura. Right then, a fourth dragon rider half-martial ancestor appeared in the Rainbow Cave. Su Zimo had a grim expression. By the looks of it, there were definitely not many half-martial ancestors of the dragons. However, every single half-martial ancestor of the dragons was too strong. Up till this point of the battle, both he and Night Spirit were in terrible states. The four dragon rider half-martial ancestors were already troublesome for him. However, the two of them might not be able to withstand the attacks of the Protoss. Roar! Night Spirit roared once more. Rumble! Right then, an earth-shattering sound came from behind Su Zimo, as though a huge army was galloping over. The ground trembled. Su Zimo subconsciously turned around. Dust billowed in the canyon as countless Kunlun race members rushed over. Their momentum was vast and astonishing. This was even more terrifying than a huge army. This was millions of Kunlun army rushing toward Su Zimo. However, when they arrived in front of Su Zimo, they automatically rushed to the sides, bypassing Su Zimo and charging towards the four dragon rider half-martial ancestors. At this moment, Su Zimo understood. Night Spirit had become the new lord of Kunlun. He led all the Kunlun race members to attack the Protoss. A counterattack from Kunlun. From God? Mimyu Sandworm this time, Night Spirit wasn't protecting Kunlun alone. He had Su Zimo by his side. He had the entire Kunlun race. The addition of the Kunlun army pushed this tragic battle to its limits. Good night, everyone. End of chapter. Chapter 1528. Young Master, how are you? Among the Kunlun army, a blonde girl helped Su Zimo up from the ground and asked with concern. The girl was Nian Chi. I'm fine. Su Zimo took a deep breath and continued to swallow pills. The lotus platform of good fortune was already nourishing his primordial spirit in his sea of consciousness and recovering his magic power. You rest here first. We will go up and fight for a while. Extreme Fire said solemnly, don't worry, the Kunlun race is already under Night Spirit's command. Although the Protoss is strong, the Kunlun army has tens of millions of people. They can definitely block the Protoss's attack. Extreme Fire was right. As the saying goes, enough ants can bite an elephant to death. The tens of millions of Kunlun army, under the leadership of Night Spirit, formed a huge flood and charged towards the remaining three half-martial ancestors. Originally, there were still a dozen heavily injured Protoss knights lying in the canyon. Before these Protoss knights could react, they were drowned by the Kunlun army and trampled into meat paste. Not even their bones were left. Boom! The Kunlun army clashed with the three half-martial ancestors, causing a huge explosion. In the instant of the collision, hundreds of Kunlun race died in the hands of the three half-martial ancestors. On the battlefield, flesh and blood splattered everywhere. The strength of the three half-martial ancestors was too strong. If it was anyone else, they would probably be drowned by the Kunlun army in an instant. However, the three half-martial ancestors rode the black dragons and fought with the Kunlun army without retreating half a step. Most of the Kunlun race were killed by the three black dragons before they could even reach the half-martial ancestors. The black dragons could not withstand a single blow from Night Spirit. However, against ordinary Kunlun race, they were invincible existences. The three black dragons spewed out 3 balls of black flames at the same time, burning towards the Kunlun army. Samadhi Dao Fire. Extreme Fire hollered and conjured hand seals. He channeled the Scarlet Flame Heart Sutra and released the Samadhi Dao Fire, pushing his essence spirit to its limits. In the baptism of this great battle, Extreme Fire was also undergoing a metamorphosis. His Samadhi Dao Fire became even purer and more condensed. Many Kunlun race bigwigs and half-martial ancestors also unleashed their spells. In that instant, a rain of fire descended. The flood rumbled as it collided with the black flames spouted by the 3 black dragons. Magical power surged. The 5-colored cave flickered with brilliance. The 5th dragon rider half-martial ancestor had arrived. However, the instant the 5th dragon rider half-martial ancestor descended, Night Spirit's figure appeared in the sky. Like a ghost, he suddenly attacked. This half-martial ancestor Long Chi's reaction was also extremely fast. His figure flickered and he actually dodged Night Spirit's sure-kill attack. Then, he raised his spear and stabbed upwards. Clang! The Night Spirit's tail lightly swayed, and a black shadow flashed past, colliding with half-martial ancestor Long Chi's spear, causing sparks to fly everywhere. Kacha! The black dragon beneath half-martial ancestor Long Chi was unable to escape Night Spirit's pursuit. Its neck was bitten off, causing blood to spurt out. This half-martial ancestor Long Chi was enraged and fought with Night Spirit. Night Spirit's physical strength was also weak and he was riddled with wounds. The two of them fought and were surrounded by danger. After paying the price of more than 10 wounds, Night Spirit finally killed the 5th half-martial ancestor Long Chi. Night Spirit took a deep breath and raised his spirit. He limped towards the other 3 half-martial ancestors. The Kunlun army had a large number of people, but they could only continuously sacrifice their lives to barely block the 3 half-martial ancestors outside the canyon. The strength of the Kunlun army was still unable to threaten the half-martial ancestors who were fully armored. Because of the existence of Night Spirit, the Kunlun army was able to fight against the half-martial ancestors. Soon, the 6th half-martial ancestor Long Chi descended. Not long after, the 7th half-martial ancestor Long Chi appeared. One must know that every half-martial ancestor Long Chi could cause huge damage and impact to the Kunlun army. There was no need for numbers. 10 half-martial ancestors Long Chi could probably scatter tens of millions of Kunlun army. At this time, Su Zimo had recovered a lot of stamina and joined the battle once again. Night Spirit remained hidden in the dark. He did not even need to show himself, and he was already a huge threat to the half-martial ancestors. If Night Spirit did not show himself, the half-martial ancestors present would have to be on guard against him. Night Spirit could also take advantage of this opportunity to rest and heal his injuries while waiting for an opportunity to strike. More and more Kunlun race members died in the canyon. If not for Night Spirit, these Kunlun race members would have already collapsed and fled in all directions. However, with Night Spirit guarding this place and Su Zimo charging at the forefront, these Kunlun race members also forgot about life and death. They continued to fight and roar. Many Kunlun race members had also killed until their eyes turned red. Blood, corpses, broken limbs, broken arms, everywhere they looked, it was a scene of blood. The Kunlun race suffered heavy casualties and half-martial ancestors Long Chi were also falling. This battle lasted for half a day. The number of Kunlun race warriors that died in the canyon was uncountable. Their blood flowed like a river. As for the Protoss half-martial ancestors Long Chi, they were also killed by Su Zimo, Night Spirit, and many Kunlun race members together. Finally, Night Spirit bit the last black dragon in the canyon to death. He lay on the black dragon's body, panting heavily. He almost didn't even have the strength to move. Su Zimo had just killed the last half-martial ancestor Long Chi. In exchange, his sternum was completely broken and his internal organs were shattered. His organs were bleeding non-stop. Every time he panted, there was a strong smell of blood and his life aura was weak. His injuries this time were too serious. In his sea of consciousness, even the creation Lotus platform stopped spinning and its light dimmed. Even the powerful self-healing ability of the Green Lotus True Body could not heal such a serious injury. Perhaps only the primordial divine spring could heal it. Su Zimo, Night Spirit, Extreme Fire, Nian Chi and many other Kunlun race members were bathed in blood as they looked at the five-colored cave not far away with nervous expressions. Half an incense stick's time passed. 5 minutes passed. No more Protoss appeared in the five-colored cave. Was it over? Many Kunlun race members did not look happy. Instead, they looked sorrowful. Countless clansmen who had lived with them for tens of thousands of years had fallen forever and would never stand up again. Although they had defended Kunlun, the price they paid in this battle was too great. Nian Chi lowered his head slightly, not daring to look at the surrounding Kunlun race members or Night Spirit. Although she fought side by side with Su Zimo, Night Spirit and the Kunlun race, the blood of the Protoss flowed in her body after all. The scene in front of her was caused by her clansmen. Nian Chi lowered his head and did not say a word. He had a lot on his mind. "Let's go back," Su Zimo said softly. His voice was heavy with exhaustion. Suddenly, before everyone could turn around, another commotion came from the direction of the five-colored cave. Everyone's expressions changed. At this moment, if any Protoss army appeared, it would definitely be a disaster for them. Another half-martial ancestor dragon rider rushed out of the five-colored cave. This half-martial ancestor dragon rider was clearly different from before. This Protoss was no longer a black dragon, but a pitch-black, fleshless, gigantic bone dragon with sharp bone spikes on its body. This half-martial ancestor dragon rider also wore a black crown on his head. This was the Dragon Rider Commander. The Dragon Rider Commander slowly pulled out a gigantic sword from his storage ring. Black patterns crawled all over this gigantic sword. It was filled with a dark and cold power that was pure to the extreme. The Dragon Rider Commander slowly said, "Ants of Tianhuang, you have annihilated 2 of my god race's legions and numerous dragon riders. Today, I invite out one of the 4 great divine weapons of the god continent, the Sword of Misfortune. Misfortune descends. I represent the continent of gods to launch a divine judgment on you." End of chapter. Chapter 1529. The Dragon Rider Commander activated his divine power, and the black patterns on the Sword of Misfortune became even deeper. Black spiderweb-like power spread out in all directions. The entire world seemed to be enveloped by these black spiderwebs, forming a large black net. Some of the Kunlun race members could not dodge in time and were infected by these black spiderwebs. Their expressions instantly froze on their faces, and their life auras plummeted, dying in an instant. Under the envelopment of these black spiderwebs, the Kunlun race members fell down one after another. Whether it was the Kunlun race's powerhouses or half-martial ancestors, as long as they were infected by these black spiderwebs, their bodies would be instantly covered with strange black patterns, and they would die on the spot. Even their primordial spirit could not escape, dying with everlasting regret. This is the web of misfortune. Half-martial ancestor dragon riders slowly walked towards Su Zimo and the others, and coldly said, "You are all just prey in this web of misfortune. No one can escape the divine judgment of misfortune." Deep fear appeared in the eyes of the Kunlun race members. Even facing half-martial ancestor dragon rider, these Kunlun race members dared to fight him head-on. But facing this sword of misfortune, this unknown and terrifying power, the Kunlun race finally collapsed. There was nothing that could block this web of misfortune. When magic arts landed on it, they were silently swallowed up, not even causing a single ripple. Even magic treasures that landed on this web of misfortune were dyed with black patterns, and were reduced to scrap. In the blink of an eye, tens of thousands of Kunlun race members fell down forever, never to stand up again. Su Zimo stood at the very front. Black spiderwebs also landed on his Qinglian true body. A strange power flowed through the wounds and entered Qinglian true body. Dark and cold, it destroyed the life force of Qinglian true body. If Qinglian true body was in its peak state, perhaps it could block this web of misfortune. But now, Qinglian true body was already in tatters, and it could not block this strange power at all. The most terrifying thing was that this was not the full power of the sword of misfortune. To put it simply, the web of misfortune was nothing more than the aura emitted by the great sword. It was like streams of sword chi. Even so, it was more than enough to wipe out the entire Kunlun race. If the sword of misfortune were to fall, who would be able to block it? Even if Su Zimo was in his peak condition, he might not be able to withstand it. The sword of misfortune, one of the 4 divine artifacts. He really didn't know what kind of methods the godly continent used, and how much time it took to create such a dark and evil weapon. Su Zimo had used these 2 ancient treasures to almost destroy the Protoss's 2 armies. And now, the Protoss had unleashed one of their 4 divine weapons, the Sword of Misfortune, to bury Su Zimo, the Night Spirit, and the Kunlun race. Retreat! Su Zimo growled. Zimo! Young master! Extreme Fire and Nian Qi were greatly alarmed and wanted to go forward. Night Spirit also struggled to stand up from the Black Dragon's corpse. He wanted to stand beside Su Zimo and resist the Sword of Misfortune together. All of you retreat. Su Zimo turned around and shouted with a sharp gaze. Extreme Fire and Nian Qi were slightly stunned. They had never seen such a serious expression on Su Zimo's face. This sword is very terrifying. We can't block it. Su Zimo said in a deep voice. Retreat to the exquisite secret realm immediately and leave Kunlun ruins. Zimo, what about you? Extreme Fire asked loudly. I can't leave anymore. Su Zimo smiled bitterly. At that moment, if not for the support of Qinglian in his consciousness, the dark and cold energy would have rushed into his consciousness and killed his essence spirit. Night Spirit's eyes were bloodshot. He wanted to charge forward, but he was surrounded by the Kunlun race and retreated to the back of the canyon. Night Spirit was already exhausted and his aura was weak. He struggled a few times but could not break free from the Kunlun race's guards. He could only watch as Su Zimo gradually disappeared into the distance in the canyon. A sense of helplessness surged in his heart. Night Spirit reared his head and roared into the skies. His voice was mournful and filled with endless sorrow, as though he was weeping. Su Zimo's consciousness was gradually sinking and his vision was turning blurry. He could vaguely see the dragon cavalry commander approaching with the Sword of Misfortune in his hand. The footsteps suddenly stopped in front of him. Fufu! The dragon cavalry commander sneered. Ant, you're very strong to be able to last until now. However, you still have to die. It's your honor to die under the Sword of Misfortune. The dragon cavalry commander raised the gigantic sword in his hand and aimed it at Su Zimo's chest, stabbing it viciously. Exclamation point! Blood spewed out. The Sword of Misfortune pierced through Qinglian's true body instantly. The gigantic tip of the sword pierced through Su Zimo's back and blood dripped. Young master! Nian Qi's expression was sorrowful as tears gushed out. Extreme Fire's body trembled as well as he gripped his fists tightly with endless rage in his eyes. The net of misfortune formed by the aura emitted by the Sword of Misfortune was already so terrifying that it could kill all mighty figures and half-martial ancestors. What realm would the power of the Sword of Misfortune reach? Even Mayana patriarchs might not be able to survive against the Sword of Misfortune, let alone a conjoint body mighty figure like Su Zimo. All of a sudden, Extreme Fire's expression changed as he asked sternly, "What's that?" He was not the only one. Nian Qi, Night Spirit, and the other members of the Kunlun race sensed it as well. In the direction of Su Zimo and the dragon cavalry commander, an extremely vast power burst forth. In the face of that power, everyone seemed incomparably insignificant, as though they could be engulfed and disappear at any moment. That was not the power of the Sword of Misfortune. The aura of that power was completely different from the Sword of Misfortune. The moment that power appeared, the dark and cold nets of misfortune that filled the valley dissipated silently. The power spiraled in the valley with Su Zimo and the dragon cavalry commander as the center. "I've got it," Extreme Fire said in a deep voice. "The power of the Sword of Misfortune has triggered the divine power forbidden zone of the Kunlun ruins and triggered a divine power storm." By the time Extreme Fire said that, the divine power storm in the valley had already formed. The figures of Su Zimo and the dragon cavalry half-martial ancestor were faintly discernible in the divine power storm. "Ah!" Nian Qi exclaimed with a pale face as he muttered instinctively, "Divine power storm? Wouldn't young master be torn to pieces by the divine power storm?" There were 3 types of divine power storms. There was a minor divine power storm, a major divine power storm, and a supreme divine power storm. However, even a minor divine power storm was enough to tear some Mahayana patriarchs apart, let alone Su Zimo, who was at the conjoint body realm. "Ah!" Before Nian Qi's voice even fell, the Dragon Knight commander's miserable shriek of pain rang out. Within the storm of divine abilities, the Dragon Rider commander's body began to swell at a speed visible to the naked eye, bursting forth with boundless vitality. The vitality was too immense and the Dragon Cavalry commander's body could not accommodate it at all. It swelled and exploded, turning into a blood mist. His essence spirit was also torn apart by the divine power storm and turned into dust. His body and spirit were destroyed. End of chapter. Chapter 1530. Su Zimo's consciousness was a little blurry and he was in a daze. He could vaguely sense that something seemed to have happened to the Dragon Knight commander. After a tragic cry, there was no more sound. How could this be? What happened? Is the Dragon Knight commander dead? Su Zimo's mind was in a mess. The power of the Sword of Misfortune had already broken through the defenses of the Creation Lotus platform. The black-haired essence spirit's body was crawling with the strange power of black spiderwebs. His life force was decreasing rapidly. Qinglian of creation was also motionless and her life force was weak. Right then, an extremely boundless life force surged into his body and healed his injuries continuously. Even the dark and cold power of the Sword of Misfortune could not defend against that massive life force. Su Zimo's black-haired essence spirit was initially on the verge of death and could die at any moment. However, after the massive life force was injected into his consciousness, the black-haired essence spirit gradually recovered. The black spiderwebs on the Creation Lotus platform gradually melted as well. Against that boundless life force, the power of the Sword of Misfortune melted silently like snow meeting the blazing sun. Before long, the power of misfortune that invaded Su Zimo's body was completely neutralized by that massive life force. The Sword of Misfortune that was stabbed into his chest was being pulled out bit by bit, as though there was some force pushing it. Before long, with a clang, the divine weapon of the Continent of Gods was pulled out of Su Zimo's chest and fell to the ground motionlessly. After the massive life force expelled the Sword of Misfortune, it did not show any signs of stopping and surged into Su Zimo's body in a frenzy. Su Zimo's meridians, organs, flesh and blood that were initially devoid of life force gradually recovered under the stimulation of that massive life force. Su Zimo's consciousness also began to return. Before long, he woke up. What happened? Su Zimo was slightly stunned and focused his gaze. He found himself in the middle of a huge storm. This storm contained an extremely large amount of life force, as vast as the sea. This life force was endlessly pouring into his body. The wounds on his body were healing at a speed visible to the naked eye. Not long after, scabs formed and fell off. There was not a single scar on the wound. It was as smooth as jade. The injuries in his body were also healing rapidly. After all, Qinglian's true body had practically been crippled during this battle, and it was extremely damaged. Only the primeval divine spring would be able to repair it. But now, the effect of this enormous vitality surging into his body seemed to be even more intense than the primordial divine spring. It's the divine ability storm. It didn't take long for Su Zimo to realize what had happened to him. Half-martial ancestor Long Qi took out the misfortune sword. Although the sword of misfortune's aura was powerful, it wasn't powerful enough to trigger a divine ability storm. But later on, half-martial ancestor Long Qi used the power of the sword of misfortune to stab into his chest, immediately triggering a divine ability storm. The old storyteller had said that the divine ability storm was caused by the remnant power of the divine ability. It was also because of this that the power released by each divine ability storm was different. If it was an offensive divine ability, the divine ability storm that was triggered would definitely contain an extremely terrifying killing power that could easily tear a cultivator apart. As for the divine ability storm in front of him, it was clearly triggered by a healing-type divine ability. It didn't mean that a healing-type divine ability storm didn't have any threat. As long as it was a divine ability, its power would be astonishing and vast like the sea. It was definitely not something that a mighty figure or a half-martial ancestor could withstand. The vitality of a healing-type divine ability was boundless and continuously surged into half-martial ancestor Long Qi's body. Half-martial ancestor Long Qi's body couldn't withstand such an enormous amount of vitality at all. That was why his body exploded and he died. The reason was very simple. Vegetation needed rain, but if a torrent poured down, all the vegetation would die from drowning. Simply put, the Dragon Rider commander was stuffed to death by the immense vitality contained in the divine ability storm. The reason why Su Zimo was still unscathed up till now was because more than half of that massive life force was negated by the power of the Sword of Misfortune. As for Su Zimo's body, it was in tatters and almost lost its vitality. Not only did the vitality not cause any harm to Su Zimo, it even allowed Qinglian's true body to recover and her injuries were healed. Although the divine ability storm had weakened significantly, there was still a vast amount of vitality that continued to surge into Qinglian's true body. Su Zimo's eyes were filled with ecstasy. If it were anyone else, the remaining vitality would be enough to burst their body and die on the spot. However, this vitality was a rare opportunity for the Green Lotus true body to replenish itself. Su Zimo simply sat cross-legged in the divine ability storm and closed his eyes. He began to absorb and refine the immense vitality in his body and cultivate. Others couldn't eat this vitality. However, Qinglian's true body could swallow it all. As time passed by, Su Zimo's Qinglian's true body became purer and his essence spirit became more condensed as his cultivation realm increased slowly. Su Zimo had only just cultivated to the late-stage conjoint body realm after absorbing and refining the fretless wood. If he wanted to advance by another minor realm and reach the peak of the conjoint body realm, he would probably need hundreds or even thousands of years to cultivate normally. His rank, 7 Qinglian's true body was also far away from breaking through to rank 8. But now, by chance, the divine ability storm had descended and allowed Qinglian's true body to transform rapidly. Far away, Extreme Fire, Nian Qi, Night Spirit and the others were finally relieved when they saw that. The three of them exchanged glances and could not help but laugh. There were tears in their laughter. This was the joy of surviving a calamity. The eyes of the Kunlun tribe members widened as they stared at the scene before them in disbelief. There were still people who could survive the divine ability storm? Night Spirit, Extreme Fire and the others did not go far. They guarded the vicinity and rested on the spot to recuperate and heal their injuries. On the one hand, they were worried about Su Zimo's safety. On the other hand, they were also worried that another Protoss would charge out of the Rainbow Cave. Thankfully, after the death of the dragon's commander, God Mainland seemed to have realized something and no more Protoss entered Tianhuang Mainland. In the blink of an eye, a day and night passed. Night Spirit had already recovered significantly with his powerful regeneration abilities and was the first to stand up. Even if another Protoss barged in, he would be able to kill them. The rest of the Kunlun race were far inferior. All of them were pale and riddled with wounds, but they were still trying their best to recuperate. Although Extreme Fire and Nian Qi had yet to recover from their injuries, they had recovered a lot of stamina and could move freely. The one who changed the most was Su Zimo. After a day and night, the divine ability storm was almost completely dissipated. As for Su Zimo, his cultivation realm had broken through once more and he had already reached the peak of the conjoint body realm. His rank, 7 Qinglian's true body, was infinitely close to rank 8 as well. Of course, he still needed time to consolidate and perhaps an opportunity to break through to rank 8. One had to know that since ancient times, the only person who could nurture the creation Green Lotus to grade 8 was the ancient Buddha Emperor. Chapter 1531. Of course, the changes that the Divine Power Storm brought to Su Zimo were not as simple as they seemed on the surface. With the help of the Divine Power Storm, Su Zimo truly sensed the power of divine powers. Of course, it was only a day and night. It was impossible for him to comprehend divine powers. He could not even comprehend a single trace of the power of divine powers. However, this experience of being in close contact with divine powers established a perfect foundation for him to comprehend divine powers in the future. Furthermore, after a day and night of cultivation, along with the transformation of Qinglian's true body, Su Zimo gained a hint of enlightenment. Initially, he thought that he was merely lucky and blessed. Therefore, the divine power storm triggered by the Sword of Misfortune was a healing divine power storm. If it had been a murderous divine ability storm, he would have been torn to shreds by the divine ability storm at the very first moment. His body and Tao would have vanished. However, Su Zimo gradually understood when he sensed the power of the divine power. Qinglian of creation was nurturing a divine power to begin with. However, he did not know if it was a minor, major, or supreme divine power. No matter what divine power it was definitely a healing divine power. Therefore, the divine power forbidden zone was triggered by the Sword of Misfortune. However, due to the existence of Qinglian of creation, it was a healing divine power storm. Every sip and peck was predetermined. There was no fortuitous encounter that would befall him for no reason. Another 6 hours passed. The divine power storm dissipated completely. Su Zimo opened his eyes and stood up. Sensing the immense power and exuberant life force in his body, he could not help but roar. Peak conjoint body realm. The peak of Qinglian's true body at grade 7. If he had not come to Kunlun ruins, Su Zimo would have to cultivate for countless years to reach this realm. Furthermore, Qinglian's true body had undergone the baptism of the divine power storm. The power of the Bloodvine race's kill order on him had long turned into nothingness. Zimo, congratulations. Extreme Fire stepped forward and said with a smile. Su Zimo nodded and said, it was also a blessing in disguise. After this battle, although Extreme Fire's cultivation realm did not break through, his overall combat prowess increased considerably. This was a baptism of life and death. A baptism of blood. Not many people had experienced such a great battle in their cultivation. Not many people were able to survive after such a tragic battle. Everyone who survived would have limitless achievements in the future. This kind of experience was the most precious treasure. Su Zimo looked around and felt that something was missing. He suddenly frowned and asked, "Where's Nian Qi?" "I really didn't notice." Extreme Fire exclaimed softly. "Over there." A Kunlun race expert with sharp eyes pointed at the 5-colored cave far away and shouted. Su Zimo and the others turned to look. Nian Qi was standing at the entrance of the 5-colored cave and looking over. Her beautiful eyes were fixed on Su Zimo without blinking, revealing a deep reluctance and attachment. Under the illumination of the sunlight, Su Zimo could clearly see 2 drops of sparkling tears rolling down from the corners of Nian Qi's eyes. Su Zimo vaguely realized something and hurriedly took a few steps forward, shouting, "Nian Qi, what are you doing? Come back quickly." Nian Qi shook her head without saying anything. However, there was a hint of determination in her eyes. Nianqi, what's wrong? Extreme Fire said loudly as well, if there's anything, come down and discuss it with us. Why did you run over there? It's so dangerous. Young master, I'm leaving. A moment later, Nianqi said softly. Frowning, Su Zimo said in a deep voice, Nianqi, if you still acknowledge me as your young master, come back immediately. Don't do anything stupid. I order you to come back. Su Zimo's tone turned sterner. He had never spoken to Nianqi in such a tone before. Nianqi had been by his side for a long time. Although she had always considered herself to be a maidservant, he had never seen Nianqi as one. Su Zimo treated Nianqi as his kin, as if she was his biological sister. Nianqi had never disobeyed his wishes either. No matter what Su Zimo did or said, Nianqi did not question him at all and supported him without hesitation, without any complaints. Young master, I'm sorry. Nianqi pursed her lips and held back the tears in her eyes. Taking a deep breath, she said, I can't listen to you this time round. I'm leaving. Su Zimo fell silent. He knew that Nianqi had already made up her mind and it was useless no matter how he tried to persuade her. Where is Nianqi going? Extreme Fire was still confused and turned to ask Su Zimo. God's mainland. Su Zimo said slowly. Extreme Fire was startled and jumped in fright. Extreme Fire asked hurriedly, why is she going there? Although she has the bloodline of the Protoss, she knows nothing about God's mainland. Furthermore, if she heads over from Tianhuang mainland, she'll definitely be attacked by God's mainland. Furthermore, only half of the God's blood flows in her body and her bloodline is impure. God's mainland won't tolerate her. Su Zimo did not reply to Extreme Fire. Others might not be able to understand, but he understood Nianqi's intentions. Actually, Nianqi was already acting strangely when she saw the 8 diagrams and learned the truth of the primordial war. Nianqi was often distracted and lowered her head, not daring to meet Night Spirit's gaze. Although the primordial war had nothing to do with her, she felt guilty and blamed herself because of it. This kind of guilt and self-reproach had reached its limit after yesterday's great battle. Nianqi was an orphan, an abandoned baby of the Protoss. It was only when she met Su Zimo that she felt like a family. However, Nianqi was still sensitive deep down. Nianqi did not know how she was going to face Night Spirit in the future. Although Night Spirit did not have any enmity towards her, she would definitely recall the blood feud between her parents every time she saw her. Nianqi did not know how she was going to face Su Zimo in the future as well. The truth of the primordial war would be revealed to the public sooner or later. At that time, the fact that Su Zimo's maidservant was a Protoss would definitely attract countless criticisms. She was afraid of causing trouble for Su Zimo and losing Su Zimo. More importantly, Nianqi did not know how to face her. Nianqi was going to the God mainland. Even if her future was uncertain and it was extremely dangerous, she still had to go. She wanted to face the God mainland alone. She wanted to do something for Su Zimo, for Tianhuang mainland, for the countless living beings who died in the primordial war yesterday and atone for the Protoss. Perhaps, this was also her redemption. Su Zimo and Nianqi looked at each other from afar. There was no need for Nianqi to say or explain. Su Zimo understood Nianqi's intentions. Young master, you have to take good care of yourself when I'm not by your side in the future. Nianqi said gently. All right, Su Zimo nodded. Young master, don't worry. I'll definitely return. Pausing for a moment, Nianqi thought for a moment. If I don't return, don't worry, young master. Perhaps if you don't return, I'll go look for you. Su Zimo interrupted Nianqi and said firmly. When she heard that, Nianqi looked at Su Zimo in a daze and tears gushed out. Chapter 1532. Su Zimo knew that Nianqi had made up his mind. No matter how he tried to persuade or stop him, he could not change Nianqi's decision. Tianhuang mainland was plagued with internal and external troubles and a great calamity was imminent. All the more, he could not leave and follow Nianqi to the mainland of gods. The only thing he could do was make a promise for Nianqi. Su Zimo's spirit consciousness moved and a gigantic sword not far away suddenly flew up and landed in his hands. It was one of the 4 divine weapons of the Protoss, the Sword of Misfortune. Su Zimo tossed the Sword of Misfortune to Nianqi. Nianqi caught it instinctively. The gigantic sword was extremely heavy. Even with Nianqi's divine strength, his body sank slightly after gripping the hilt. The Sword of Misfortune did not move at all in Su Zimo's hands. However, when it landed in Nianqi's hands, it emanated a dark and cold aura once more. "Young master, this is..." Nianqi was confused. "Take this sword and head to the mainland of gods." Su Zimo said in a deep voice, "This sword is useless in my hands. Only the bloodline of the Protoss can activate its power." Nianqi pursed her lips and did not say anything. She knew that this was only on the surface. Even if Su Zimo could not control the power of the Sword of Misfortune, this gigantic sword was still a rare divine weapon. The reason why Su Zimo wanted her to bring the Sword of Misfortune to the mainland of gods was so that she would have a guarantee. The 2 armies of the Protoss that entered Tianhuang mainland and many Dragon Knights were wiped out without a single survivor. Even the divine weapon was left behind on Tianhuang mainland. Although Nianqi was a remnant of the Protoss and had an impure bloodline, she would definitely make a great contribution if she returned with the Sword of Misfortune. The attitude of the mainland of gods towards her would also change. At the very least, her life would not be in danger. This was Su Zimo's real intention. "Thank you, young master." Nianqi held the Sword of Misfortune with both hands and bowed in the direction of Su Zimo from afar. Then he turned around and leaped into the 5-colored cave, disappearing from sight. Su Zimo stared in that direction, silent for a long time. Alas! Extreme Fire sighed emotionally. "Actually, this girl doesn't have to be like this. She's too sensitive. Let her be," Su Zimo said softly. Su Zimo spoke in a carefree manner, but when he thought of Nianqi's uncertain future and whether they would meet again in the future, a wave of worry and disappointment surged in his heart. "Big brother, let's go," Night Spirit said. Su Zimo nodded and instructed, "Arrange for some people to keep an eye on the God-slaying canyon. If the Protoss makes any strange movements, we'll know immediately." Actually, the Protoss would most likely be calm for a period of time after experiencing this crushing defeat. However, he had to be prepared in advance just in case. Although the kill order on Su Zimo had been lifted, he was not in a hurry to return to Tianhuang mainland. Instead, he stayed in the Kunlun ruins temporarily and continued to cultivate. The Kunlun ruins had been stabilized, and Night Spirit had become the new master of Kunlun. There was no place safer and more suitable for cultivation than here. His gains from this battle were too great. The transformation of Qinglian's true body, her perception of divine abilities, and the eye technique in the nether fluorescent stone all required a long time to accumulate. Extreme Fire also stayed in the Kunlun ruins. Spring came and autumn passed. Time flew by. Time seemed to pass even faster in seclusion cultivation. In the blink of an eye, Su Zimo had already entered the Kunlun ruins for 100 years. 80 years ago, the Protoss invaded the Kunlun ruins and a great war broke out. However, in the past 80 years, the internal strife of the Kunlun ruins had been quelled. Many Kunlun beings recuperated and became extremely peaceful. There were no longer any abnormalities in the 5-colored cave. However, Tianhuang mainland was in a state of turmoil and chaos. For the past 100 years, the abnormal movements of the primordial races had become more frequent. Among the primordial 9 races, apart from the dragons, Kuan, and barbarians, the other 6 races had begun to walk out of their forbidden grounds and expand their territories crazily. For the past 100 years, countless sects and factions were destroyed by the primordial races. Among them, a total of 37 out of the 108 upper sects were destroyed. The number was still slowly increasing. In the chaos of war, countless living beings from the 4 regions, 3 seas, and 1 continent perished. The East Ocean was dyed blood red and did not dissipate for a long time. The young masters of the primordial 6 races led the armies of the Witch, Blood Vine, Protoss, Golden Crow, Rakshasa and Heavenly Eye races to attack the sects and seize territory. Everywhere they passed, a bloodbath was set off. The combat strength of the primordial races was terrifying. Almost all the young masters had already cultivated to the half-martial ancestor realm. Without the patriarchs, no one could suppress the experts of the primordial races. Because the primordial races did not touch the super sects of the cultivation world, the 9 immortal sects, 7 fiend sects and 6 Buddhist monasteries remained silent for the past 100 years. A delicate balance was maintained between the super sects and the 6 primordial races. However, all the cultivators knew that this state would not last long. Finally, that balance was broken mercilessly after a war broke out in the southern region. The forbidden grounds of the Blood Vine race were in the southern region. As they continued to expand their territory, it was inevitable that a war would break out with Clear Wind Temple of the 9 immortal sects. 100 years ago, Teng Lingzi was killed by Su Zimo. The Blood Vine race had long chosen a new young master. Under the lead of the young master of the Blood Vine race, the army of the Blood Vine race attacked Clear Wind Temple. The battle lasted for an entire day and countless cultivators of Clear Wind Temple died and were devoured by the Blood Vine race. Finally, the patriarch of Clear Wind Temple arrived. However, that was also the reason why the patriarch of the Blood Vine race was alarmed. A single patriarch of the Blood Vine race killed more than 10 patriarchs of Clear Wind Temple without a single survivor. The battle escalated. The Emperor of Clear Wind Temple appeared and killed the patriarch of the Blood Vine race. However, the Blood Emperor of the Blood Vine race descended and killed the Emperor of Clear Wind Temple on the peak of Clear Wind Mountain in just 3 rounds. In the end, the Mystic Emperor was the one who appeared and fought the Blood Emperor without a victor being decided. He forcefully rescued some cultivators of Clear Wind Temple and retreated to Enigma Palace. However, after that battle, Clear Wind Temple of the 9 immortal sects was destroyed as well. After that battle, the Blood Vine race released even more vicious words. If the emperors of the human race dared to appear again and interfere in the fights of Tianhuang mainland, the Blood Emperor would appear and kill the emperors of the human race in Tianhuang mainland. It was a blatant threat. Furthermore, it was a threat to the emperors of the human race. The cultivation world fell silent. There was no response from the emperors. The Emperor of Clear Wind Temple was dead and could not defend against the Blood Emperor for 3 rounds. Many emperors were not confident either. What was even more frightening was that many emperors knew that the Blood Emperor was the weakest among the emperors of the primordial 6 races in this generation. Furthermore, the Blood Vine race had more than one emperor. Before long, the Golden Crow race entered the East region. Clear Heart Nunnery, one of the 6 Buddhist monasteries of the East region, was the first to be destroyed. In this battle, not a single Mahayana patriarch of Clear Heart Nunnery appeared. That was because the Mahayana patriarchs of Clear Heart Nunnery knew that even if they appeared, they would not be able to save Clear Heart Nunnery from destruction. If they appeared, they would only die like the dozens of patriarchs of Clear Wind Temple. The advanced ancient battlefield claimed to be a world where the primordial races could not enter. At the very least, they would be safe as long as they stayed in the advanced ancient battlefield. In just half a day, Clear Heart Nunnery was reduced to ruins. By the time the Patriarch of Enigma Palace arrived, it was already too late. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.